You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Common Descent Podcast, where we talk about paleontology, evolution, and all sorts of stuff. This is episode 222, and this episode's topic is shrews.
Yeah.
For the record, I will point out that somebody on the Discord exactly 1 hour ago suggested that episode 222 should be two Ataras, and you should have said that way earlier.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Instead, 222 is shrews, which is still feels pretty good.
It almost rhymes.
We will be talking about shrews, the not so generic tiny little mammals, their habits, their anatomy, what features of their lifestyle and morphology make them distinctive and unique. And of course, we'll be looking at their evolutionary history and their fossil record. Now, Will and I are both very underinformed when it comes to shrews. So
Yup.
to assist us with this discussion, after the news break, we will be joined by special guest Derek Ouden, who loves shrews and will geek out in our direction about shrews for the remainder of the episode. It is going to be a whole lot of fun.
Yes. So ready to learn.
We are excited to talk about shrews. We are excited to learn about shrews, excited to have a guest on, and excited to fulfill this request from several of our listeners. As always, every topic we talk about on the podcast is requested by our audience. Shrews and their lineage were requested by Saga, Brian, Max, Aluridae, and, fittingly, Sonorat's Shrew.
There we go.
A very self-focused request.
Yes, just talk about me.
Yes, next our listeners are going to start requesting episodes about humans. Before we get into all that, let's go through some announcements first and foremost. As always, we have a Patreon. The support that we get from our Patreon subscribers allows us to do everything we do with the podcast. Basically all of our funding comes from Patreon. We are extremely grateful for everybody who donates any sort of money in our direction. Patrons get all sorts of goodies, including bonus content and live streams, and at higher levels, there's merch stuff. And at certain levels of subscription on Patreon, you get your name shouted out here on the podcast. This episode, we would like to welcome new patrons: Pyrope, Elizabeth, John, Mantar, Bumblebeast, Supernova, Sarah, and Arturo and Simone.
Welcome. Thank you.
Welcome and thank you for your support. Very exciting to see so many new patrons, in particular this month, because it's Snake Month. And until the end of this month, the Crocs and Snakes tier is available for subscription on our Patreon, and pledges that we receive at that tier during this month will contribute to charitable donations that we will be making at the end of the summer towards reptile conservation. This year, our donations are going towards Save the Snakes, the Crocodile Research Coalition, and the National Parks Conservation Association here in the United States. We have gotten all sorts of fun interactions and engagements and support on Patreon from our listeners. We've got the Snake Stuff channel open in Discord. We're doing a Snake Month live stream that if this is the first time you're hearing about it, it's archived on our YouTube, so you can go check it out. We did a Croc Month live stream. Snake Month, very exciting. Thank you to everybody who has been participating in our summer festivities.
Yes, it's been so much fun.
Speaking of participation, I believe we have some mail recently.
We do. We've gotten some really lovely mail. We got a album of soundscapes inspired by our Big 5 extinction episodes from June, one of our patrons, and even has some album art that the disc is wrapped up in, which is cool.
It's very cool.
And then we got a book from Naomi from Switzerland, a book they worked on as an editor, if I remember right, that is Mayhem at the Museum. It's a story about a kid having an accident at the museum and then getting people's help to try to fix it as they try to fix a skeleton. And it's very cute.
Very cute. Thank you both, Naomi and June, so much for these very thoughtful and exciting gifts.
Yes, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, we got to find a CD player.
Yes,
Listen to the soundscapes.
yes.
Speaking of mail, kind of, we recently launched a second podcast, spin-off podcast called Leaf It to Us, hosted by Nora and Allie, our favorite paleobotanist, where they talk about plants and plant evolution and plant exciting things. Season 1 of Leaf It to Us is now more than halfway through, and the hosts are planning a mailbag episode at the end of the season. They're going to be taking questions from supporters on Patreon and then answering those questions in a publicly available episode to celebrate the end of the season. If you are a patron of Leave It to Us, or if you're considering being a patron of Leave It to Us, make sure you submit a question or some in the mailbag submission form, which is posted on the Patreon. Should be a lot of fun. Maybe I'll be in it.
Yeah, very cool.
Also, upcoming stuff, Dragon Con.
Woo!
Will and I are going to be returning to Dragon Con as we so often like to do. We are lined up to be on a bunch of panels, mostly in the science track, maybe elsewhere. The official list is not finalized just yet, so we can't announce it just yet, but we will be on panels probably every single day of Dragon Con this year, which is taking place between August 28th and September 1st in Atlanta, Georgia. Come say hi if you are inclined to go to Dragon Con.
Yes, always exciting. Tons of fun every year. Can't wait to see some of you there.
And then finally, one more very special announcement and signal boosting, something that some friends of ours are doing. Two of our friends from grad school, Eric and Jake, have recently created and launched a new app. It's a data management app called Nidarity. The goal of the app is to make data collection and collaboration easier for research teams, academic labs, any group that is gathering data. When Eric was talking to me about it, he explained that the two of them decided to create this app after their own personal struggles trying to find a convenient way to manage all of their research data.
Yep.
So they built an app for it. The way that they put it is, if you constantly jump back and forth between multiple Google Forms, spreadsheets, and chart builders, Nidarity is here to simplify and streamline your workflow. That's the goal, is so that it can all be in one place. Nidarity provides a single resource for you and your team to build customized forms, tables, and charts for collecting and visualizing data. The app can be accessed from the web browser and device of your choice, so team members can work together wherever they are. And whereas other similar platforms require every user to pay in order to participate, on Nidarity, each project is paid for only by the person who starts it. And then they can invite
Gotcha.
everybody else on the team to view or contribute or whatever level of participation they're going to have. If you go to the website, there is a free trial available so you can check it out. And then there are multiple paid tier options for projects of varying sizes, from small groups of hobbyists or students to large multi-year long collaborations. Nidarity is brand new, so there's still a lot of other features planned for the future, including exportable charts, generators of PDF reports or presentations, built-in analytics, and since it's new, I'm sure that Eric and Jake would appreciate feedback and suggestions from early users.
Yes.
So, if you, dear listener, are a researcher or a hobbyist, or for any other reason like the idea of having a convenient app to manage a bunch of data for you and your collaborators, check out Nidarity. You can find it at nidarity.com. That is CNIDARITY. Nidarity, like Nidaria, the group that includes jellyfish and corals and stuff. CNIDARITY.com. We'll also put a link down in the episode description. Eric gave me a little beginner tour of it. It's pretty cool. There's a lot of cool features in there.
That sounds awesome. Well done.
Yeah, our grad school colleagues and friends are doing cool stuff. And we're very
Making
happy
stuff.
to share it around. And we got a lot of nerds in our audience, people who are into collecting data.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, good luck, everyone. Let us know what you think of it.
Yes, please do. All right, I've had enough announcing stuff. Let's instead, well, we're going to announce more stuff, but in a longer format. Let's do the news. Every episode, before we get into our main topic, we like to talk about some of the recent newses in the realms of paleontology, evolutionary science, and the like. Will, did you bring some news?
I decided I would today.
Great,
This
finally.
time.
I'm always doing the news by myself.
All right, you're right. Just every time we has to re-record the parts for my stuff.
It's just an AI generated Will voice
Yes, yeah.
reading a script that I wrote about the news.
It's just David pinching his nose. That's all. That's all I am. There is no Will. It's just David pinching his nose.
It's just it has been the whole time.
My first news is actually really interesting. It is about the seeming contradictory effects of trying to eliminate invasive smallmouth bass and actually causing their population to get worse.
Oh.
Yeah. This is research by Liam Zari et al. In PNAS, and the article is a press release in phys.org from Cornell University. So, invasive species, that's a concept many of us are familiar with when humans introduce an animal to an environment and then it proliferates, its numbers become problematic. It either is eating local animals or plant life to an amount that is threatening species, or it's competing with species and pushing them out of their habitats. When this happens, very often we have eradication efforts, or control efforts at least, things that are put in place to try to get rid of this invasive species, or at least keep its numbers down enough that they do less damage and maybe the ecosystem can adjust to them. These efforts are very common. They're very labor intensive and often costly, and typically don't result in the actual eradication of the invasive species. It is
Right.
very rare that these efforts are 100% successful. It's happened, but that is by far not the norm. So it's been looked into of like, okay, what makes a good eradication effort, and when do they work and don't. It is well known that many efforts can cause evolutionary responses in the invasive species, especially chemical tools, using pesticides or
Mm.
herbicides famously will result in immunity evolving in the invasive species we're trying to poison and get rid of.
Yes, it's very similar to using too many antibiotics can
Yes.
spur bacteria or whatever to develop resistance.
Exactly. They this is now a new selective pressure of this poison being used against them, and they very commonly we will see adaptations for resistance or immunity to it. But it was thought that like manual removal of just going in and taking the animals out of the environment, either by hunting or catching, wouldn't have those effects because it's not a selective pressure. We're just deleting animals from the environment. This study was monitoring the removal efforts of smallmouth bass in some Adirondack lakes here in the US and seemed to have found that no, they do have an effect, and it can be a dramatic effect. Smallmouth bass here are native to the US, but they were introduced to these lakes in the 1900s. So they are invasive to this region, not to this continent. But they took over a bunch of lakes. They were competing with local species and eating smaller animals. And so they were not only doing damage to their prey populations, but out competing a lot of the natives' fish. They even noted like stunting growth rates in brook and lake trout that were native there. So major invasive species, big problem. For decades now, I think they've said like for the last 20 years, they have been doing a manual removal program and taking out as many fish as they can. What they do is they use electrofishing,
Mm,
shock the water, and stun all the fish, scoop them up, throw back the natives, keep the smallmouth.
sure.
And the fish will all recover. They're stunned for a bit, but they're not killed, they're not damaged. And this has been going on for about 25 years, and they've been monitoring it. The Cornell's Adirondack Fishery and Research Program looked at the annual data of the fish populations during this time and found that the smallmouth bass populations have actually increased, but the population dynamic has shifted, and it seems to be due to direct evolutionary responses to the eradication program. What's happened is that the smallmouth bass in this lake now grow faster and develop more quickly. So now the population is a higher number of fish that are younger and smaller than previous generations. So they are just growing up faster so they can reproduce sooner in life and in general staying smaller. So it's a different kind of smallmouth bass. It's not the same dynamics, but there are now more individuals than there were before the eradication efforts were put in place.
Right. If they are regularly being removed from the water, that is favoring those individuals that reproduce quicker because they're getting to reproduce and disperse their young before they have a chance to be removed.
Yes. So they are noting that this indicates that simply mass mortality, just killing of individuals, is a selective pressure and is having this effect. Beforehand it was thought that it's like, well, that's not really a selective pressure. You're just deleting, like, they're not, unless they adapt to the way we're going to get them, but like, that's not a
Right.
pressure.
Yeah. For a second, I was like, you're not going to say that they've become resistant to electrical
Exactly.
impulse.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we would expect that a natural a selective pressure and a response kind of thing would be. But evidently, just killing of individuals is enough to be a selective pressure and cause evolutionary responses. They did
Wow.
genetic studies on them and found that there were large changes in 3 regions on different chromosomes associated with early maturation and increased growth. So this is a legitimate genetic shift in the population. So this is, the opposite of what you would expect, and therefore has a lot of implications for similar conservation efforts with invasive species. They noted that when you look at the pattern of the annual data early on, the efforts had the desired effect. Populations dropped and it did what you would expect, but then you see it slowly come back to pre-eradication numbers and bounce back up. They note that this gives us information of things that could be useful in improving other approaches. One being that doing genetic study of the invasive population while the effort's going could be important to try to catch these events and note what might be happening.
Hmm.
Studies into maybe how we could design things to avoid applying these kind of selective pressures, which this is, brand new info, so there's not an idea of what that would look like.
Yeah. I don't have an idea.
Me neither.
Yeah.
But that this really emphasizes that avoiding invasive species to begin with is the best solution, because this is showing us that potentially once you get an invasive species, there might not be much you can do about it. Like,
Yeah.
it might be a lose situation as soon as they get established, because even just killing them as much as you can might not be enough.
I love this. We talk so often that evolution by natural selection is a passive process. It is something, it is a filter. We are putting living species and individuals through a filter, and that ends up having effects. Evolution is not planned, and it's not predetermined, and it's not forward thinking. But I love that this shows that evolution can be petty.
Yes. Yep.
That this evolution, like, oh, you wanted less fish? Well, have we got something to tell you? How about more fish?
Well, it makes me think about the phenomena that I've seen things talk about with coyotes, that trying to eradicate coyotes can have the same effect, because if you kill the lead female of a coyote family group, all of the females that weren't breeding in that family group now go off and start
Mm.
families. And
Yep.
so trying to hunt coyotes to get rid of them can actually cause an immediate spike in the coyote population. And so the obvious solution isn't always going to be the one that will work.
Yeah.
The article also mentioned that there were 2 companion papers that were published that looked at the effects on the other native fish and the smallmouth bass behavior, and that the native fish in the process showed rebound at first, but then some continued to improve, but others went back down. So that also emphasizes that you really need to be monitoring all the factors. You can't just put a plan in place, and they'd be like, all right, in 50 years, we'll get rid of them all because things might be
Yeah.
happening in weird ways. And that these new smallmouth bass are more skittish and seem like their behavior is also adjusting to these efforts.
Now they're harder to catch.
Yeah.
Wild. Obviously, this is bad news for the native ecosystems in those areas, but at the same
Yes.
time, way to go, bass.
Oh yeah.
You're killing it.
I always feel that with invasive species of like, this is terrible. I can't be mad at the invasive species because they're just kicking butt.
Right. It's not your fault. It's not
Like,
your
it's
fault that
not.
you're incredibly impressive.
Yeah, just don't hate the player, hate the game.
Hate the coach that put him in. It was us. It was us. We put him in.
Yes, it was us every time.
Well, I, as it turns out, also have a news that is related to fish, and it is also about fish dying.
Oh.
I mean, it's fossil fish, so obviously. But
Yes.
specifically, this is a population of fish that seem to have been in the habit of choking to death on cephalopods.
Ha! Yeah, wow.
This is extremely cool. This is obviously not for the fish. This is research published in Scientific Reports by Martin Ebert and Martina Kolbl-Ebert. We will put a link in the blog post with all of our news links to a press release on phys.org credited to Sandy Oster. These fish are fossilized in the Solnhofen Basin, which is the famous late Jurassic sediments where, for example, Archaeopteryx is from. There's pterosaurs, but these are marine sediments, so there's fish and all sorts of aquatic creatures. These are very late Jurassic, around 152 million years ago. The fish in question are a genus called Tharsis, which are extremely common ray-finned fish, so, like most fish that we think of today. These are relatively small fish. I think that they're noted, like, the biggest ones of them get to almost a foot long, like 25 centimeters, so they're not very big fish. They also have small teeth, and they lack gill rakers, which
Oh.
suggests that they're not filter feeding, but they also aren't eating big things. So they're interpreted
Yes.
to probably be microcarnivores. They eat small fish, they eat small crustaceans, things like that.
Cool.
Notably, they do not eat cephalopods.
Not well, at
The
least.
cephalopods, and no, they sure don't, in question, are belemnites. So belemnites are these sort of torpedo-shaped cephalopods, cousins of squids and octopuses that were very common during the Mesozoic. They have these long, narrow, cone-shaped shells. The belemnites in this instance are the genus Hybalithes. This paper describes 4 different specimens of Tharsis fish, right, preserved all or most of the skeleton, with belemnites. You look at the picture of these fish and it looks like they got speared by belemnites.
Yeah, yep.
Each one of the fish has a belemnite going through, like, in the mouth and out the gills,
Woo.
through the body of the fish. These fish, obviously, if you block the mouth and gills of fish, that's bad news. These fish
Yep.
apparently suffocated after becoming impaled by belemnites.
Ouch.
This struck the authors as unusual for a number of reasons. First of all, again, the fish are very small. They are too small to be feeding on belemnites. The belemnites get, and in fact, they note that the fish's mouths only open about 1 centimeter wide, and
Oh,
the
wow.
belemnites at their widest point are 2 centimeters wide.
Yeah.
So, like, these fish can't have been eating, like, preying upon belemnites. In fact, some belemnites in this same time period are known to have eaten small fish. So we would expect it to be the opposite way around. The other thing that is unusual and interesting is that belemnites didn't live here.
What?
Belemnites are mostly open ocean animals. They didn't tend to live in shallow, so they would have lived nearby in the Tethys Sea, but this shallow basin would not be expected to have been their main habitat. So we have a a murder mystery to figure out. Here is what the authors think is happening. For one thing, they noticed that the belemnites in this area, not just the ones impaling fish, but generally when belemnite shells, because we find the hard shell, are found in these basins, they are often overgrown with bivalves.
Cool, cool. All right.
Oysters and clams and stuff are on them. And in fact, one of the belemnites impaling a fish has a big oyster attached to it,
Wow.
which suggests that these belemnites were not alive anymore.
Yes.
Like this belemnite that had a big oyster on it, if it was alive, it wouldn't have an oyster on it. When it got stuck in a fish, it apparently had been dead for a while. They also note that all of the belemnites that are preserved in this basin still have the part of their shell that is called the phragmocone, which is the section that contains their gas chambers for
Mhm.
buoyancy. Sometimes I infer that they'll fall apart, and so you might not get the whole thing preserved. But in this area, they always have them preserved, which suggests that what was probably happening is that belemnites would occasionally die out in the open sea and get washed into this basin and just be sort of floating around collecting bivalves and stuff attaching to the carcass of this belemnite.
Yes.
They also note that in all of the four fish specimens, the broad end of the belemnite is stuck in the mouth and the narrow part is sticking out of the gills.
Mhm. Mhm.
In modern oceans, it is a well-known phenomenon that when waste, like plastic bottles and plastic waste and stuff, get into the ocean, if they become covered in algae and other things that grow on them, fish will often accidentally eat them, thinking that this is
Yeah.
food or trying to get the food off of them. So what these authors suspect happened here is that the fish were probably trying to feed on algae or soft tissue or something on or around these belemnite shells. But being suction feeders, they could have accidentally sucked up the narrow end of the
Mhm.
belemnite shell, and they can't spit it back out. If a fish gets something in its mouth that it doesn't want, I mean, sometimes some fish can spit it back out, but they'll also sometimes try to expel it through the gills.
Mhm. Mhm.
So what they suspect happened is these fish accidentally sucked up the end of these shells, tried to push it out through the gills, but then the big end of the shell was too wide to fit in the mouth. So it got
Yep.
stuck and the fish suffocated.
Yeah, no, that it makes total sense that, like, to them, while it's sitting there with stuff on it, it's gonna look like a rock. You know, it's gonna look like some
Right.
rocky substrate.
Or any sort of thing floating in the water.
Yeah, yeah.
Or they might even just be trying to suck like the algae off of it.
Yes, yeah. But not realize the thing's gonna move with it
Mm-hmm.
and that there's a big solid piece in there. So weird.
Yeah, and the fossils look like someone was spearfishing with belemnites.
Yeah, yeah.
Just through these fish. It's wild.
Which is also extra funny because I'm pretty sure that's the joke we made about belemnites when we did the cephalopods episode. Because these are belemnites, like, look very squid-like, but then have this pin cap of a cone shell, and we made a joke about them like launching themselves at things. So,
And listen, we were right.
you know,
Turns out we were prescient for a thing that happened 152 million
yep,
years ago.
life imitates art. Um,
We will be expecting our royalty checks in the mail.
Yes, you're not allowed to mention them spearing stuff
That
without
is
passing some our way.
that is Common Descent IP. We will be in contact with the authors of that paper,
Ah,
with our lawyers.
ridiculous. Well, my next one is also modern. I didn't realize this until just now that both mine are modern studies for
That's right. My
modern.
last one is about as far away from modern as you can get.
All right, we're staying balanced. We're just
Yep.
keeping the scales even. This is another very bizarre instance of evolution, and arguably doing a thing that many would have argued doesn't happen in evolution, which is reverse evolution. This seems to be a
Oh,
situation
sure.
where some tomatoes have developed an ancestral state and reverted back to an old way of producing defenses. This is research by Adam Joswiak et al. In Nature Communications, and the article is by Jules Bernstein in University of California, Riverside News. This study is looking at tomatoes on the Galapagos Islands. And as the Galapagos is famous for, you can get these interesting specializations from island to island. And tomatoes on different islands have evolved in slightly different ways. Specifically, some of the tomatoes uh, have reverted to an old form of defense that is ancestral to their group. These tomatoes are descended from South American tomatoes and were likely brought over by birds and droppings, as plants like to do on islands. The defense that these tomatoes are making are alkaloids, which we've talked about before in our plant episodes with Allie.
Yeah, episode 175, plant defenses.
Exactly. These are well known among the nightshades, which include tomatoes and potatoes and eggplants. They make bitter molecules that act as defenses and pesticides to deter predators and animals from grazing on them. These things are important to people who research food product plants like tomatoes because alkaloids in too great a number can be poisonous. And so the main inspiration for the research was looking into how do they produce alkaloids, like what is the genetic and molecular process and steps of producing alkaloids, so that we could potentially understand it better and maybe have them skip some of those steps or make less alkaloids and stuff like that. The Galapagos tomatoes are making alkaloids, but some of them are, to quote the article, making the wrong ones. They're not making typical tomato alkaloids. They're making alkaloids that are more similar to eggplants, which is the ancestral form of this group's alkaloids.
Oh.
Yes. They looked at 30 samples of these tomatoes collected from different islands, and they found that plants on the eastern islands were producing normal tomato alkaloids, but Western Island tomatoes had reverted to this ancestral alkaloid. And that what it seems has happened is a shift in what's called stereochemistry, which is the arrangement of atoms in a molecule. So you can use the same atoms to make two different molecules by putting them together differently. And that seems to have been the shift, that there's not a chemical difference, but the arrangement of the atoms in those molecules has shifted. And that's all it took to shift between these two alkaloids. To try to figure out how that shift would have happened, they looked at the enzymes that assemble, that put together the alkaloids, and they found that a change in just 4 amino acids on one of the enzymes is enough to flip the molecule's arrangement and make the different alkaloid. They proved this by synthesizing the genes, this gene coding for enzymes in the lab, and inserting them into tobacco plants, and they started producing old compounds. And so it seems like a very small change can shift this. And the reason this is getting so much attention is because it seems like they have reverted to an ancestral form. They used ancestral state reconstructing, to estimate what the ancestral state of this alkaloid would be like using our knowledge of the modern group's DNA, and it matched what we are seeing. So the estimates based off of the modern knowledge matched what it seems they have done. So this is why the term reverse evolution has been coming up with this article, because it seems like they may have reverted to, actually reverted, not convergently found a different way to be more like their ancestors, but actually revert to an ancestral state.
Yeah, interesting. That
Yeah.
does make me wonder, since the change involved such a minimal adjustment in the actual genome, it makes me wonder if this is something that just flips back and forth over time.
Yeah, exactly. Is this actually a very common,
Have other groups done this?
Mhm.
Yeah. Because it's reverse, but it's reverse in a very small way. And I
Yes,
could see
exactly.
it being something that just sort of alternates. Hmm.
They noted that this is interesting because finding an example like this is something that we could look at in other groups to see if similar changes have been noted in other groups in other specific instances of is this more common or is this a
Mhm.
unusual situation. They also noted, and I thought this was interesting, that the fact that it was the eastern and western islands showing the different behavior also is not seemingly random. The eastern islands are older islands and have a more stable ecosystem, and they're making the more modern alkaloids. The western islands are younger and their landscape is more barren and the soil is less developed, and those are the ones that adapted this older form of defense. So it could be that the harsher environment led to a adaptation to a different defense mechanism that might be a more drastic or responsive defense. So it does seem that the difference in the islands was a part of why this happened.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's fun. It turns out they do make tomatoes like they used to.
Yay.
Well, speaking of old stuff, one more bit of news. I've got news about what might be the oldest known rocks on Earth.
Cool.
Well, I guess I should specify the oldest known Earth rocks on Earth.
Fair.
We do get rocks from space sometimes, and those are extremely old. But these seem to be
Yes.
the oldest, no, homegrown. We made them. We made them right here. This is research and published in Science by C. Soul et al., and we will link in the blog post to an article by Ben Turner on Live Science. So, as we have discussed occasionally in the podcast history, the first 500 million years or so of Earth history are known as the Hadean, eon in quotes, it's kind of an eon. The Hadean, this was the time of the earliest crustal formation. The oceans were still like getting a start. Very, very little actual material is left over on the planet from this time period. Partially because it's just extremely old, and a lot of
Yes.
that material has been recycled at this point by tectonic activity, but also because the crust wasn't necessarily stable at that time. So there might
Yeah.
not have been as much persisting solid rock around. All of the material that we have had so far that we've been able to date from the Hadean has been mineral grains within other minerals that have been reworked into other rock deposits, often zircon grains. The zircons
Yes.
are very famous for this. Australia is famous for having these extra. I think the oldest, if I remember right, the oldest zircon grains are something like 4.3 to 4.4 billion years old, which is practically as old as Earth is. That is
Yep.
almost right up to the earliest that Earth existed.
Yeah, that's almost as old as you can get something from Earth.
Yes. This research is examining a rock formation not in Australia, in fact, quite the opposite, in Canada.
Oh.
This is the Nuvuagatuk Greenstone Belt. I probably said that wrong, with my apologies to the community to whom that name belongs. This belt of greenstone is located along the eastern shore of Hudson Bay in Canada. These are, and they have been known for a while, to be among the oldest rocks on Earth. Research in the past has led to general agreement that these rocks are at least 3.8 billion years old, which would put them in the early part of the Archean, which comes after the Hadean. But a study back in 2008 did some dating, and they claim to find dates of 4.3 billion years for these rocks, which would make them the oldest rocks known on the planet. But that dating has been debated since then, and there have been
Mhm, mhm.
questions about if that's accurate. This new study is by the same team of people that did that original date. They're back to do more dates.
Cool.
This time, they took dates from an igneous intrusion into these rocks. So, in geological terms, an intrusion means that effectively magma eked into these rocks at some point and then hardened and became an igneous formation, which means that this igneous rock is younger than the rocks around it. But
Yes.
igneous rocks are easier to date, so this can give us a minimum age. We know that at the very least, these rocks were in place by the time this magma body intruded. These researchers dated it using samarium dating, which is not a form of dating we get to talk about very often. This is radiometric dating, so your element breaks down over time and it turns into a different element. You count how much breakdown has happened and you estimate the age. Episode 167. Samarium decays along two paths. Samarium 147 decays into neodymium 143, and samarium 146 decays into neodymium 142. These two processes happen at a different rate, so their half-life is different, which means that basically these are two different radiometric decay processes that are happening within the same rock, which means we have a built-in check. If
Yes.
these two should line up because they are both in the same rock. If they don't line up, something has gone wrong.
Cool.
In this study, they dated using both of these different decay paths, and they got, between the two of them, one estimate of 4.157 billion years, and the other one at 4.196 billion years, which, in geologic terms, is pretty darn corroborative.
Yeah.
That is
Wow.
basically this. Yes, those are extremely close dates, which is compelling evidence that this is an accurate date for these rocks, somewhere between 4.15 and 4.2 billion years old. But again, that's the intrusion into this rock formation, which suggests that this greenstone belt is at least 4.15 to 4.2 billion years old, which does seem to support the previous estimate of 4.3.
Wow.
Now, last time there was debate about this and double checking and questioning, and I'm sure there will be questioning and double checking on this one as well. But this seems to be that it has the potential to be the only known example of Hadean rock crust that formed in the Hadean, not just the little minerals that have come out of it, the actual crust from the Hadean eon preserved to today, which also would make it the oldest known rocks on the planet, besides asteroids and stuff. And beyond that, some of the rocks in this greenstone belt are ocean deposits. So they are
Ooh.
materials that precipitate out of the ocean. So if they are this age, they can also give us insight into the composition and conditions of the Hadean Ocean,
Cool.
which is very cool.
This is super awesome for all of the research reasons. It's also just awesome as an earthling of like this is kind of surreal of
Yeah,
here is some of the first solid ground that existed on our planet. This is some of the first land, even if it wasn't out of the ocean, but like crust of our planet. That's so if we lived in a fantasy world, some evil sorcerer would be going after this rock to enact the ancient ritual. Like
absolutely.
this is crazy.
These are the rocks spoken about in the eschatological texts.
Yes, the rocks of time.
This is also, we often talk about, this is rock from before the dinosaurs or before animal life. These are rocks older than life.
Yes, this was a
This
dead world.
is, we do not, and I mean, odds are there probably was maybe some life, but like
Yep.
our oldest actual evidence of life on Earth is 3.8 billion.
Well, and it's one of those where if there was life, it might not be something we'd recognize as life at that point because we don't know what
Yes.
the earliest steps look like. So it might not be a living world as we'd recognize it.
Yes. Also, really hard to detect signs of ancient life when you don't have rocks.
Yep.
So
This is so cool.
we maybe have rocks. So if there is 4.2 billion year old fossil evidence out there, this is the place for it.
This is our chance.
This is it. Let's go do it.
That's incredible.
It's so cool.
I'm very excited. Like, I know we need to corroborate and double check it, but I'm very excited by this.
Yes, go listen to episode 100 for more insights into what was going on in the Hadean in the early Archean.
Yes. Yes.
Well, bringing us back to living things, that's the end of our news. Let's talk about shrews. See, I found a rhyme. I found a rhyme for
Yes.
shrews. We did it.
There
We
we
got it.
go. There we
We're
go.
going to have a short musical interlude, and then after that, we're going to be joined by special guest Derek Ouden, shrew enthusiast and shrewsiest, if you will, who will tell us all about what's wild and interesting and fascinating about shrews. Stay tuned. Hello, Derek.
Hello, David. Hello,
Hello,
Will.
Will.
Hello, David. Hello, Derek.
Thanks for joining us. We're very excited to have you today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about our topic today.
Yeah, you're here to teach us about a group of animals that we only vaguely know exist.
Yes, shrews.
Before we get to that, please introduce yourself for our listeners.
For sure, yeah. So my name is Derek Ouden. I'm an outgoing ETSU master's student and an incoming Arizona State University PhD student, and my work at ETSU focused on shrews.
Yeah, you've done some work with the shrews at the Gray Fossil Site.
Yes, yeah. So specifically, I was looking at the Gray Fossil Site shrews and trying to infer some stuff about what they might have been doing. So and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but we've got some really cool stuff going on.
Absolutely. Well, we're very excited. As we were just saying before we started the recording, Will and I know almost nothing about shrews.
Yep.
And so having a colleague around who is a shrew aficionado is a real boon for us and the podcast and the listeners.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. I love talking about shrews. I think they're really super interesting animals, and so any opportunity I get to talk to somebody's ear off about shrews is a good day.
Excellent.
Well, let's start with my first official question for you, which is what is it that you like so much about shrews?
Yeah, well, so I think a lot of this goes back to everybody's first fascination with paleontology is looking at dinosaurs and seeing how crazy they look. And I went through that phase, and then I started looking around for other really crazy cool things. And it turns out there's a lot of really small critters that have a lot of really cool things going on if you look a little bit deeper below the surface. So shrews are, on the surface look pretty generic in terms of how mammals go, right? They're fairly mousy, don't look particularly interesting. But if you really kind of peer below the surface a bit more, there's a lot going on. So morphologically and behaviorally, shrews are really fascinating. And so that really scratched that itch of, wow, weird stuff is going on with this group that I really interested in pursuing.
Yeah,
Very
the
cool.
small groups, like groups of small animals, can get overlooked so easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, especially shrews because there is sort of a standard mammal shape that is the mouse shape. And a ton of different groups of animals have achieved this. It's like the lizard or salamander for mammals. This is the basic shape of mammals. And that leads to, I think, the first thing that is confusing about shrews is that at first glance, shrews look like 100 other groups of small mammals. So, to situate ourselves, where on the mammal family tree are shrews? Who are they related to?
Sure. Yeah. So shrews are part of this broader group of mammals called the Radiatheres. And so these are mammals like bats and horses and carnivorans. Pangolins are also in this group. And so they're related to all these mammals that seem to have originated somewhere in the northern hemisphere, but they're most closely related to these other small insect eating mammals. So things like hedgehogs, the arachnids, they're closely related to. They're also really closely related to moles and this weird group of Caribbean mammals called solenodons. So they're really closely related to those guys, and they're all in this order called Eulipotyphla. And so, yeah, the Eulipotyphlans are this group of primarily insect-eating mammals, and that's who shrews are most closely related to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eulipotyphla is sort of I kind of, and maybe this is unfair, I think of Eulipotyphla as sort of the Xenarthrans of small mammals.
Yeah.
And it is a group that has just a bunch of weirdos in it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Xenarthrans are sloths and anteaters and armadillos, and Eulipotyphla are shrews, who, as we're going to get into, are very strange. Moles, who are bizarre. Moles are very unusual. Hedgehogs are weird, and then you mentioned solenodons. which might be the weirdest ones of this whole group. I know very little about Solenodons, but they fit. They fit the
Yes.
vibe of Eulipotyphla.
Well, and it feels
Yeah.
like a kid's Saturday morning superhero team of insect-eating mammals, where it's like you've got the fast ones, you've got the armored one, you've got the one with the weird power that digs underground.
Yes,
and
the one with venom.
Yeah, like you've got these archetype like D&D party of insect-eating small mammals that are all together.
Yeah. Well, and there's also this secret fifth group of insectivores within the Elliptypha called the Nesophantids. So they're really closely related to Solenodons seemingly, but they went extinct within historic times. So within the past 500 years, the last species were around. And so there's this
wow.
secret fifth group, and as we've kind of alluded to as well, Elliptypha is really weird, and it was also what's left of a really more broad group of insectivorous mammals, right? So this is even the parsed down version of that weirdness.
Yeah.
So this is, most importantly, I think, separate from rodents.
Mm-hmm.
So shrews are very easily confused with mice and rats, and they are not even particularly closely related. They are in a very different portion of the mammal family tree.
Yes, yeah. Rodents are actually more. This is one of my favorite facts to tell people when they're like, why is a shrew not a rodent?" It turns out that primates like us are actually more closely related to rodents than shrews are related to rodents. So shrews
Yeah.
are on basically the other side of the placental mammal family tree.
Yeah, you have more in common with a mouse than a shrew does.
Yes.
Yes,
That's
yeah,
why our
exactly.
labs aren't filled with shrews that
Yes.
we're doing testing on.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's one of the
but yeah.
reasons why.
But yeah, so yeah, like I mentioned, Elliptypha is basically all that's left of this historical grouping called Insectivora, which I think probably a number of listeners have maybe heard of. This is
Mhm.
a historic grouping of mammals. It's all of the sort of small insect-eating mammals. So it's things like tree shrews were in there, elephant shrews, flying lemurs. So the colugos were in there for a bit. There's also a bunch of really interesting extinct groups that were in this broader Insectivora. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later when we talk about the not shrew groups, the groups that aren't
Yeah.
actually true shrews.
Yes.
But eventually those guys all got split out from Insectivora. What you had left was the Lipotyphla. And so that's most of what we understand it to be now, plus a couple of extras that we had to get rid of. So those extras being things like golden moles and tenrex was a big one. So yeah, it's what's left over from a broader kind of wastebasket.
Yes.
Yeah. It's very validating to know that scientists historically have been just as confused about small mammals as I am about
Yes.
small mammals.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're not alone. It's also fun whenever we have a guest for topics like this, because I always feel like I'm have betting tickets of like, all right, is he gonna say tree shrew? Oh, he didn't say tree shrew. Gotcha. All right, noted.
There is a section in the outline for not shrews.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is going to
Yes.
be fun. But before we
Yeah.
do that, let's zoom in a little bit. So shrews are different from all of these other groups of small mammals. What makes shrews distinctive? Let's start with their just physicality, their anatomy. What are the defining features of shrews?
Shrew. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
That's staying in.
Yeah, so I think one of the best things, the best known things about shrews for most people is the fact they're really small, like overall. Like if we're looking at sort of anatomical features that define shrews, one of them is definitely going to be size. So there are not any big megafaunal shrews. There never have been, right? There's nothing the size of a small dog in Cericidae, the family that contains shrews.
Hey, that feels like a thank goodness kind of note.
It definitely is, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I've seen that movie.
Yep.
Yeah, the well-known documentary. But yeah, so the smallest shrews are, really, really tiny. These are animals that are about 2.5 grams in weight. And I think what really drives that small size home is the fact that 2.5 grams is about the standard weight for a penny here in the United States. So really, really small animals. This is the shrew Suncus etruscus. Really tiny, but even the biggest shrews, so something like Suncus murinus, this is the Asian house shrew. These guys are still really small overall for mammals. They're something about the size of a small rat, so like 200 grams.
Yeah.
So real small. And so small size overall is a big characteristic of shrews. And so yeah, another thing that defines shrews pretty well, there's a bunch of really interesting characters of their skull and teeth. Like when you pull back, all of the the skin and stuff, that's where shrews really get weird.
Mm-hmm.
Is when you look at their dentition and their skull and some other aspects of their skeleton.
Yeah, you were doing a table at the museum not too long ago where you had a 3D print of a shrew skull that was blown up to large size so that you could actually see it. And it looks like a movie prop.
Yeah.
It looks like somebody designed a monster skull for a movie.
Probably the most xenomorph, aliens looking mammal skull. Like, super, super oddly shaped, if you're familiar with other mammal skulls.
Yeah, they're really fantastically weird. And so to sort of get into that, I think one of the things that people really first notice about, shrew teeth that's kind of off-putting in a lot of aspects is their first incisors on the top and bottom. So those front two teeth, right, on the top and bottom of their upper and lower jaw look really different from a lot of other mammals. They look kind of like rodents in some aspects where they're procumbent, so they're sticking forward. So that's a big feature of a lot of rodents. But in shrews, they're not ever growing. Those incisors are not ever growing like they are in rodents. But the other thing with their incisors is the fact they have multiple cusps on them, which is a feature that not a lot of mammals have. Lots of shrews have additional cusps both on the upper and lower incisors, whereas most other mammals don't. So really very unique aspect of the shrew incisor, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of people look at initially and we're like, wow, that's weird.
Yeah, they kind of look crab clawy with the teeth on the inside of the crab claw. They just got this almost serration. Like, it's not serration, but
Right.
this very toothed tooth.
Well, and their cheek teeth are also, with rodents, rodent molars tend to be relatively flat, kind of like our teeth in a way. Shrew teeth look more like more almost like dog teeth.
Yeah.
Where they're more flat, they're more blade-like. They look a lot like bat teeth.
Yes.
Which isn't a helpful comparison for most people.
Yeah, no, they're really interesting. The teeth, the back teeth, the molars, and the premolars of shrews. They have this really interesting dentition, much like bats, that's called dilambdodont. So they've got two basically V's forming the main cusps of their molars on the upper teeth. So this is an adaptation for basically slicing up insects, which is their primary diet. So they're using these big bladed cusps to chop up insects. And actually, when you look at their fourth upper premolar and their first lower molar, you see a lot of similarities to things like carnivores, where they have the carnassial pair.
Yeah.
So they've got these really weird bladed premolars and lower molars to help them slice things up.
Yeah, shrew teeth are made for doing one thing.
Yes.
And they do it very well.
Yes, yeah. They're made for slicing for sure. And in some groups as well, there's also a lot of crushing going on with some of those teeth too.
Okay.
Not necessarily the back teeth, and this is another difference from rodents, is the fact that shrews, there's not a gap in between their incisors and the rest of their chewing teeth. There's these weird little teeth in between called unicuspids that, as the name suggests, are these kind of simple little cuspid teeth. And in a lot of shrews, sometimes those get really big and are used for crushing.
Huh.
Interesting.
That's weird.
So, well, first, are there other defining anatomical traits that we need to mention?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, one of the other, I think this is one of the big three things that a lot of people know about shrews, is that in at least some groups of shrews, there are iron deposits in the teeth. So the teeth are orange. There's a couple of shrew species that I've looked at in the course of my research where it sometimes gets to like be almost black from these iron deposits. They're really, really dense with iron. And so that iron is something you also see in some rodent incisors. The front part of their incisors will be orange with iron. And it seems to be, in both shrews and rodents, an adaptation for basically preventing cracks from propagating through the teeth. So if it bites into something hard, that iron stops the crack from continuing through the entire tooth.
Yeah, I mean, they've effectively alloyed their teeth. Like, that's when we make metal alloys, we're mixing two metals together so that they can bolster each other. And that's what they're using this iron to do in their tooth, which is insane.
Well,
it's Wolverine stuff.
And I like the implication that shrews decided that enamel wasn't good enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They were like, the hardest tissue that vertebrate animals have achieved. And shrews went, put iron in it.
Yeah,
I need this to be even stronger than it is.
Still working in their workshops, like this is the best you could do for me.
When I was looking into it too, and it turns out that the specific form of iron that they deposit in their teeth is actually magnetite. Like it's
Whoa.
amorphous magnetite. So I was talking to somebody recently about it, and they were like, "So if you put a magnet up to a shrew, would it be magnetic?" And I haven't tested this. I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's not quite enough iron in their teeth to be magnetic. But
Yeah.
But
But you could grind up shrew teeth and then do the classroom experiment
yeah.
you do with like cereal
Uh-huh.
boxes and get little iron filings.
Well, it makes me wonder, would they be able to feel, like, it probably wouldn't, zip them through the air like a pie in a cartoon, but if you did have a magnet nearby, would the shrew be able to go, oh, that feels weird? Like,
Huh.
Yeah.
would they be able
Like
to notice their
braces.
teeth? Yes, yeah, exactly. Just a slight pressure on those teeth.
Weird.
Right?
Yeah. So yeah, shrew
I'm-
teeth are bizarre.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, and it's not just teeth that are really interesting in shrews and that kind of help us define them as a group. They also have a bunch of other weird things going on with the rest of their skulls too. And so specifically, there's a lot going on with their lower jaw that's really helpful and interesting. That's really different from most other mammals. One of the big things is the fact that they've got what's called a divided mandibular condyle. And so your mandibular condyle is basically the connection between your lower jaw and your upper jaw. It's that joint.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
if you look at the back of your lower jaw, it looks like this big knob where it inserts into the rest of your skull. In shrews, they've taken this one structure and divided it. So there's oftentimes a little bit of a connection between this upper and lower part of the mandibular condyle, but this is something that no other group of mammals do.
So weird.
Yeah. And so it seems like that's probably something to do with how they're chewing is
Mhm.
really, really, really bizarre. So they do a lot of what's called rolling of their jaws. So as opposed to just going up and down, they also roll each of their mandibles, each of the dentaries, into occlusion. Yeah, and it's actually that's something that's pretty common in most mammals. It's not very common in primates or
Yeah.
ungulates or carnivorans. So it's all the mammals we're familiar with that don't do it, but it's really common in things like opossums it's where it's been well studied, and apparently in things like shrews too.
I did not know about this
Yeah,
form
me
of
neither.
chewing.
That's
They're
cool.
Yeah.
So it's not side by side like a cow, and it's not front and back like a bear, and it's not up and
Mm-mm.
down like us. The actual left and right side of the lower jaw is twisting.
Yeah, so it's a combination of going up and down and then twisting as they're doing that.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, kind of up and down and twisting at the same time, and that seems to be helpful in a lot of different ways, especially because it means that they can really fine tune how they're chewing depending on, say, the hardness of the thing that they're eating.
Gotcha.
So, and it also means that as their teeth wear, and their teeth wear pretty fast, even though they're reinforced with iron because they're just eating all the time. Their teeth wear, but they can accommodate that wear by changing how much they're rolling their jaw.
Yeah.
And all of
just-
this is really, this fine scale rolling is only possible because of that divided mandibular condyle.
Yeah, and they're able to adjust the angle of chewing that they're using on each tooth or each side
Yeah.
of the jaw. That makes my chin hurt to think
Yeah.
about too much. That's so bizarre, but that's awesome.
Yeah, and that's actually really interesting. That's something I've noticed in a lot of my research when I go looking in museum collections at shrew jaws. Is a lot of times, they'll still have the two sides of the lower jaw connected at that mandibular symphysis,
Mhm.
right? That's where they connect towards the front, and that's a ligamentous connection. It's not like they're not fused, and oftentimes you
Yeah.
can still kind of like move them a little bit, but the fact that they're still together kind of hints at how strong that ligament has to be to accommodate that jaw rolling.
Well, and
Yeah.
because that's something that I feel like it's so easy for us who have a fused lower jaw, where it's effectively one bone, functionally now. But so when we hear about animals that have, split lower jaws or, flexible lower jaws, it's easy to go, oh, well, then their bite must be wimpy, because if you've got this flexy, lower jaw, it's going to bend every time you bite something. But as you just pointed out, it's like, no, you can make it really effective and resilient. It's just functioning very differently from ours or like a dog's.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really bizarre. And it also ties into, to accommodate this sort of jaw rolling, they've had to do a lot of weird things with the rest of their mandible too.
Mhm.
So one of the other things that's really odd is the fact that if you look at the lower jaw of a shrew, you'll see that they've got this really weird big pocket on the inside of the coronoid process, which is the big sticky uppy part of the lower jaw. It's this big deep excavation in the side of that, and it's not on the outside part; it's on the inside part,
Yes.
which is really weird. That's not something that any other mammals do. They all kind of attach the muscles for chewing on the outside, and there's not much going on the inside. Shrews is basically a reverse to that, and all of that seems to be an adaptation for that really precise jaw rolling.
Whoa.
Cool. What else? What else is unique about shrews?
Yeah, well, so let's see. The rest of the skull, if you look at it, you'll see that they don't have cheekbones. Basically, they don't have a zygomatic arch like other mammals do. So that's pretty unique for shrews. They also, unlike a lot of mammals, they don't enclose their inner ear bones, so they don't have what's called a tympanic bulla.
Ah.
A lot of mammals do enclose those. Shrews have just decided they don't want to do that, evidently. And so a
Huh.
lot of these really unique features of shrews are all in their skulls. If you look at the sort of rest of the skeleton of the shrew, for most it looks pretty standard for a small mammal. But there are a couple of really interesting exceptions, and I think the big one that people might have heard about is this shrew called the hero shrew. You guys have heard of it?
Ooh.
I saw a thing about the hero shrew like an hour ago. Someone posted somewhere something about the hero shrew. And I saw it and I was like, oh, that's funny. We're about to, maybe I'll ask Derek about that. And now I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
feel like I've maybe
Oh,
heard the name, but
Was it
that's
the one
about
that you
it.
could step on? Was that what's
Yep.
special about
It's
it?
that one.
That like
Yeah.
a
So-
person can step on it and it's fine.
What?
Yeah.
No.
Please explain.
Yes, yeah. So this is the genus Scutosaurus. There's two species. One of them is Scutosaurus thori, Thor's hero shrew, which is pretty metal. No pun intended. And yeah, so these are shrews that they're big shrews. They're up in the upper echelon of shrews, so something like about 200 grams in weight.
Positively
And,
enormous.
yeah, big shrews. But the weird thing about them is their spines. They've got these. If you look at the vertebrae, so especially the lumbar vertebrae of hero shrews, they don't really look like vertebrae anymore. They kind of just look like this mass. They look pathological almost. They look like it's a disease because they've got all of these interlocking tubercles
Oh.
that run basically the length of their vertebral column, going from the back half of their basically chest down their lower back. And when they activate this weird system that they've got, because they can activate it with this musculature that they have, it turns the whole spine into basically this one single unit that is super strong. And so there's records of grown men standing on top of these shrews, and then the shrew walks away fine a couple of minutes later. And the name hero shrew actually comes from the fact that some of the people from where these shrews are found locally sometimes carry talismans containing parts of hero shrews because they perceive them to be invincible because of this really strange ability.
That's
They're fantastic. And to add to the mystery as well, we don't really have a good understanding of why their
Yeah,
spines
That
look
was
like
my
this.
thought. I was like, what are you defending against?
yeah.
Hammers.
Yeah.
You've evolved an armor lock system like Halo, where you can just take a hit and keep going.
Yeah, it really is a lot like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's they can turn this on, right? They can by flexing their back muscles, they can just turn their whole spine at this rigid, basically I-beam is what it's been compared to, right? It looks a
Yeah.
lot like an I-beam if you laid it on its side, and it's really resistant to compression, really resistant to torsion. And the thought is maybe they're using their backs kind of like a crowbar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what the thought is what they might do is they might go underneath or around a large object they want to pry up to get at grubs or worms or something like that, and then they'll activate their spine and lift it up,
Lift with the back.
lift with the back. Yeah,
It's that scene in Iron Man 3 when he's wearing the Igor armor and
When
it
he brings in the... Yes.
and it pistons up the platform. That's so intense and crazy.
So we're starting to get into... I want to situate us now. How diverse are shrews? How many species are there? Where do they live? What is sort of the distribution of shrews?
sure. Yeah, so shrews are actually really diverse. They're
Yup.
the fourth most specios, so they have the most species of them family of mammals. So there's
Wow.
496 species of shrews. So that's after a couple of families of rodents and one family of bats.
Yeah.
So lots of shrews, and they're distributed across most continents. So primarily in Europe, Asia, North America, Africa. They're absent from places like Antarctica, obviously,
Sure.
also from the high Arctic in a lot of areas, and also from the typical islands you'd expect, so places like Australia, New Guinea, and New Zealand. But they're also largely absent from, it turns out, South America. There are a couple of
Okay.
species in northern and South America, but for most of the continent, there are no shrews.
Too many possums.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so this is a product of the fact that it's a product of the Great Biotic Interchange.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
Episode 43.
yes. So yeah, so shrews haven't had all that much time to disperse into South America, and they don't disperse very fast, being small mammals. So
That's true.
there's not been much time for them to get down there.
Unless something's throwing them across the isthmus.
Yeah, no, not great dispersers.
So you mentioned, and I just want to reiterate it for our listeners, shrews are all in one family, that is
Yes.
Cericidae. So this is the family within that Eulipotyphla. So this is one very diverse and specious family of small animals that it sounds like are extremely impressive in their success, but overshadowed by rodents and bats, who
Yeah.
seem to be doing a very similar thing more successfully, unfortunately for the shrews.
Yeah, I mean, so and shrews kind of have what they're doing figured out, and so they're eating insects around the forest floor primarily, but there is some diversity, which I think we're going to get to as well here in a moment. But
Uh,
yeah, so they've kind of got it figured out, and even though there are some rodents and bats and things that sort of eke into the sort of niches that shrews are occupying, there's nothing that does it quite like shrews. Shrews are very specialized for this small insect eating lifestyle.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've talked a little bit about already sort of the habits of shrews and their lifestyle. And in my mind, a shrew is litter dwelling or subterranean and eats bugs. And that is about the extent of what I imagine shrew lifestyles to be. So am I correct? Is this sort of a typical shrew lifestyle? And then what sort of habits do we see and what sort of variation do we see in those habits?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, most shrews are doing general shrewy things. They're eating insects on the forest floor, but there is actually a lot of interesting diversity going on with a lot of shrews. And so it turns out that shrews live in most habitats across the world. They prefer places like forests and generally moist areas primarily, both because they're real small and so they lose water pretty easily, but also just because that's where most invertebrates that they like to eat are living. But there's some variation, and so within that sort of general shrew eating insects on the forest floor thing, there's a bunch of shrews that have actually become what's called semi-fossorial. So they're
Mhm.
living kind of like a mini, like a little mole that's less specialized for digging. So this has evolved a couple of different times. They're living in and around the forest floor, digging underneath it, eating a lot of earthworms and stuff. So they have these big, robust arms, typically not quite as robust as moles, but they've got big, long claws on them. Oftentimes, their eyes are really small because they're not looking around very much. They're primarily using their whiskers and hearing to detect prey.
Cool. Am I correct in remembering that there are mole shrews?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
there are
Because
mole shrews.
there are also shrew moles.
Yes, there are both.
There are moles that are called shrew moles, and there are shrews that are called mole shrews. And they
Come
are
on, guys.
yeah, and they and they are different. I assume that
Yes.
these are some of the shrews you're talking about that have sort of are doing the mole thing.
Yeah, and yeah, so getting into how shrew is not necessarily a very descriptive term, which we'll talk a
Yes.
little bit more later. But yeah, so there's a bunch of different shrews that have done that sort of similar thing. So here in North America, we have a couple that have done it. They're one of the really common ones around here is the northern short-tailed shrew. That's one of these semi-fossorial shrews. There's one in Asia that does it. There's a couple in Africa that do it. It's pretty widespread adaptation for shrews.
Neat.
On the opposite end of that sort of spectrum of different lifestyles that shrews have,
Flying
do there are no flying shrews, but there are tree living shrews,
Yes.
not tree
Cool.
shrews, not tree
Right,
shrews.
which are also different.
Again, yeah, not shrews. Tree shrews are not shrews, but yeah, there are tree living shrews, and so these are shrews that have semi-prehensile tails, and they're climbing around in bushes and up into the lower parts of trees. Some of them also even make nests up there, which is really unique.
Oh,
This has
cool.
evolved a couple of different times independently too. So tree living is a pretty common thing for some shrews to do.
Cool.
And then one of the really common things that has happened a couple of different times in shrews are the fact that there are water shrews.
Mhm.
Yes, I knew there were aquatic or at least semi-aquatic shrews.
Yes. Yeah, so this has evolved two separate times in shrews to varying degrees. And so these semi aquatic shrews have a bunch of different adaptations for swimming around in the water. They're also some of the smaller ones. So things like the American water shrew are the smallest semi aquatic mammals. So these are,
Oh,
you know,
interesting.
this is an animal that's like 12 grams in weight. So not very much
Wow.
bigger than the smallest shrews. And it's diving
Cool.
into really cold waters. And so to do that, they've got, really thick fur that helps trap air against their skin as opposed to soaking all the way through. They also, in a lot of species, have hair fringed feet. So instead of
Neat.
webbing their feet, they fringe them with hairs, which at small sizes effectively does the same thing as webbing. So they have
Yeah.
these big hairy paddles. There is one particular group of shrews that has taken that to extreme. They've webbed their feet, and they also, to help them cling onto rocks, have evolved suction cups.
Right.
So this is a shrew called Nectigale from, it's a really rare shrew from Asia, but they've got these suction cups on their hands and feet that they use to cling on to really slippery rocks. There's not very many
Insane.
good pictures or videos of this happening, but there is one that I was able to find of one like swimming around in a bucket, and you can see it cling onto the side.
When Derek and I were talking earlier today about this episode, Derek made a comment about being excited to provide us with more ammunition for spooky.
Yes. Yep.
And I didn't realize how true that was going to be.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Suction
really
cup
cool.
shrews, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, this shrew Nectigale has been described in multiple papers I've read as the most aquatically adapted shrew because, it's got webbed feet as opposed to just hairy feet. It also has hair on those feet too, just, for extra swimming
Mhm.
ability. It's got a fringe of hair on its tail as well to help navigate, so help with stability. And then it's
Yeah.
got these suction cups that it's using to cling onto rocks. And another thing that it seems most of these water shrews is doing is, so when they're diving, they're primarily navigating using their whiskers, their vibrissae. So they're using their sense of touch when they're navigating underwater. But it also turns out that a lot of them can smell underwater too.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And so they do this by just really quickly expelling a little bit of air from their nostrils and then sucking it back in, and just doing that repeatedly. And
So
they
they're-
actually do it at about the same rate that they would sniff on land.
Ha.
So they're doing like what a snake does, but with air.
Yep.
Yep, pretty
Like
much.
pushing air out there to collect scents and then pulling it back in. That's wild.
Like I had heard about that in the star-nosed mole. They do that when
Mhm.
they go underwater. I
Yep.
didn't know there were shrew doing that.
Yes.
That's
Shrews
so-
shrews do it too.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Well, and that's a fun, just a side note that is fun. There are also a bunch of very successful aquatic moles.
Mm-hmm.
So this seems to be something that the shrew mole continuum is good at doing, is moving around underground and in the water.
Which makes sense because if you're eating bugs, bugs are great in fresh water as well.
Right.
So
And-
there's a bunch of them under there.
And if you're good at using your front limbs to propel yourself through a medium,
Mm-hmm.
that is great for both water and dirt.
Yeah. You're already living and eating lots of insects and other invertebrates in a moist environment. Oftentimes you'll
Mhm.
be right by a stream. It seems sort of like the logical progression to just
Yeah.
dive right in and go after the aquatic stuff too.
You're going to end up in the water one way. Eventually, you might as well be adapted for it.
Oh yeah.
Someday you're going to fall out of a hole and end up in a stream.
Well, it's like watching dogs swim, where it's like your base, a doggy paddle is just walking or running, but in the water. And if you just get hands and feet that are much better at doing that,
Yeah.
you can just aim down, and now you're diving, and you're a swimming shrew.
Yeah. I was gonna say, and so I mentioned that primarily what they're using to navigate underwater is their whiskers, their vibrissae. And that's a common thing across all shrews. Most shrews are navigating primarily using touch,
Mm-hmm.
and smell seems to be an important one too. A couple of shrews also use a very crude form of echolocation for navigation
right.
too.
I have heard
So they're
that,
using
yeah.
hearing.
Are shrews mostly nocturnal?
They prefer to be active at night,
Mhm.
but
Okay.
they're, because of their super high metabolism, they can't really afford to just stop eating for that long.
that makes
Shrews will
sense.
starve if they don't eat every 9 to 10 hours.
Yeah, so
So
this is something that we've mentioned about shrews on the podcast before. It is one of I don't think we said this on mic, but we'll mention that we have 3 fun facts about shrews.
Yes.
And we've already mentioned the iron in the teeth.
Yep.
And the second fun fact that we have is that shrews have wacky high metabolism.
Yes.
And I have heard that this is a real problem for scientists trying to collect shrews in the wild, because one of the best ways to collect wild animals is you put out a trap
Mm-hmm.
and you come back the next day or a couple days later and the animals are in there. But if you do that with shrews, they'll die before you can get to them
Yes.
because their metabolism is so high.
I've also heard that they will eat everything else that had fallen into the trap.
Yes.
there's a very fun anecdote that I love to mention here, is that there's a pretty oft repeated fact that shrews can eat up to 200% of their body weight in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that statistic comes from the fact that there was a mammologist who was doing a small mammal survey, and he caught, I think it was 3 of the smaller shrew species, something like the masked shrew, which is one of the ones we have around here. And he kept them in this container for a while. And so initially, one of them killed and ate one of the shrews, one of the other shrews. So that's 100% of its body weight. And then a little while later, it killed and ate the other shrew. So it was 200% of his body weight within 24 hours.
Yep.
So the statistic
Yep.
is really that a shrew can eat up to 2 shrews
Yes.
in 24 hours.
Yep.
Yep,
As soon as you
exactly.
said 3 shrews, I went, oh, I know how that math adds up.
So what is the deal with shrew metabolism?
Yeah, it's a product of just how small they are, really. They're just burning so much energy to stay warm, right? They're endotherms, so they're maintaining a constant body temperature. And it turns out for at least some shrews, these are the red tooth shrews, the ones that do have iron in their teeth, they can't do torpor or hibernation. They just can't do it. They can't store enough fat to go through hibernation or torpor. And so they just constantly have to be eating. Turns out that they can also cache food, so that helps a little bit, but
Gotcha.
they're just having to constantly eat. They have this really high metabolism.
So we've talked a bunch on the podcast about what size does for animals. And usually when we talk about the volume to surface area ratio, we're talking about big animals.
Yes.
And how like elephants will overheat if they're not careful because they have so much volume they retain heat. Shrews have the exact opposite problem, that there is so little to a shrew. It sounds like shrews are operating at sort of the minimum bound of mammal biology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you mentioned that they are the smallest aquatic mammals, and my first thought was, well, yeah, if you get any smaller than that, you're plankton.
Yep.
Like you like, what are you gonna do in the water if you're smaller than that?
Mm-hmm.
So they it seems like they've got a bunch of these adaptations and lifestyle quirks that are a function of just being maybe as small as a mammal can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and indeed, the Etruscan shrew, Suncus etruscus, is one of 2 contenders for the smallest mammal. It's that one that's about 2.5 grams in weight. The other
Mm.
contender is the bumblebee bat, which is
Yeah.
slightly less weight. It doesn't weigh quite as much, but it's got these big wings. So there's a debate as to, what does that really mean? But yeah, so these are animals that are operating on a knife's edge for sure. And so to kind of put that point home a little bit, there's this thing that some shrews do in the winter. It's called Donnell's phenomenon, which they'll actually shrink their skulls and the rest of their body too.
Right.
So to basically get them through the winter, they shrink their skulls, they shrink their brain mass, they shrink the rest of their body and most of their organs outside of their heart. And sometimes they don't recover that mass in the spring. They
wow.
just are smaller until they die.
Whoa, I'd heard about that with weasels will reduce their brain size during winter. And like the brain case shrinks and brain mass shrinks. And then it will recover. But I hadn't thought about it with shrews, but that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Still so crazy extreme.
Wild.
Yeah, it's just a thing of being a small, endothermic animal, so an animal that maintains a high body temperature that can't hibernate. Those, weasels don't hibernate and shrews don't hibernate, and it's just a way for them to get through the winter without having to do that hibernation thing.
Wow. So are all of these shrews insect eaters?
By and large, most of them are, but there's a lot of variation across shrews. So I mean, it depends on the sort of invertebrates you're interested in too. Some shrews will specialize on particular groups of invertebrates. There's a lot of
Hmm.
shrews and even certain populations of within shrew species that eat a lot of things like snails. So there are
Yeah,
certain
yeah.
populations
Okay.
that are basically only eating snails. But there's also a lot of shrews that eat vertebrate material too.
I
So
was hoping
things
you
like
weren't going to say that.
yeah. So there are a lot of shrews that eat a lot of other small mammals. We
Yep.
talked about already. They'll eat other shrews for sure,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
they're also eating things like the aquatic ones are eating a lot of frogs and fish.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, the short-tailed shrew, the one that we have around here, semi-fossorial one, that is a very aggressive shrew and has been documented trying to take things up to the size of a small rabbit.
Yeah. Yep. That the
Yeah,
story I heard about the pitfall trap, which is one of the ways we catch small animals in forests. You dig a little hole and you put like a can or a Tupperware dish down in it, and then
Sure.
things fall in and they can't get up the smooth walls.
Sure. Classic Team Rocket
Yes,
strategy.
absolutely. And you have to be standing triumphantly at the edge as soon
Yes.
as they fall in.
You have to have your script ready.
But that they had put some out, and when they came back around, they found one that only had a shrew in it and 4 mice feet.
yep. A
Yeah.
pretty common occurrence. I had a couple professors who would do similar things, and they would tell very similar stories of both small rodents and other shrews in a similar situation.
Yeah, yeah. Professor at the time was saying that they always prayed not to catch a shrew because
Yeah.
it would just delete a bunch of the data that they had caught earlier that day before the shrew fell in.
That's actually so when people are doing these sort of trying to figure out the life expectancy for shrews, they'll do mark and recapture stuff. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
one of the things that influences their data can be like if you have multiple shrews in a trap, you're losing more and more data as your study goes on because they keep eating each other as they fall into
Yep.
the traps.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that it's so interesting because we think of my first introduction to shrews, I think, was a Animorphs book where I think Rachel turns into a shrew. Some of our fans are big Animorph people, and so they'll appreciate this. And I just remember the description of it was the just this description of this feeling of being absolutely manically voracious,
Yes.
of just I had there nothing else matters, I must eat, and just this like overwhelming hunger
Mhm.
in that like very existential body horror way that Animorphs like to get.
Yes.
And we think of shrews as being voracious and sort of nasty little guys because they are voracious nasty little guys, but it really is just a function of you have to eat.
Yeah.
This is not an animal that has a choice to fast or to wait. And so that voracious reputation that they have really is just a function of you are so small that this is your only option.
At any moment, literally any moment, you are less than a day away from starving. No
Yeah.
matter how recently you ate, you are less than 24 hours away from starvation unless you eat soon.
Yeah.
That's like you said, knife's edge
Yep.
of existence.
Yeah, and to accommodate that, right? That's why they're eating a lot of insects and other vertebrates is because they're the highest energy thing available to them, right? They're
Yes.
you know lots very calorie dense, lots of fats and proteins and stuff that they need to continue to survive. But on the flip side, the fact that they are needing to eat these really calorie dense things, these insects and other vertebrates, means that they can't effectively store food very well, right? They
Yeah.
can't cache food very well. They do it a little bit. They can cache live prey, but not as effectively as just storing some seeds in a burrow like a
Yes.
rodent can.
Yeah.
Well, and that's also a really good point that you could not graze fast enough to maintain a metabolism like you couldn't really be an herbivore at this kind of lifestyle
Hmm.
just because the calorie density is not high enough. You'd have to be nonstop literally eating food to get what you needed that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, on the note of diet, there is the third fun fact that Will and I both like to share about shrews, and that is that shrews are one of the very few examples of mammals that are venomous.
Yes.
Please tell us about shrew venom.
Yeah. Yeah, so shrews are venomous. It's been documented in quite a number of them, and the list keeps growing. But yeah, so they're they're one of two Eulipotyphlones actually that are venomous. So one of them is shrews, and the other one is those solenodons from the
Yeah.
Caribbean that I mentioned earlier. Those guys are also venomous, and so yeah, they're producing this venom in their it's saliva basically. They're producing it in salivary glands. It's entering their mouth, and then they chew it into their prey basically. Actually, in some of them, they're using those procumbent lower incisors, those forward pointing lower incisors, to kind of act as a really simple injection mechanism to just kind of
Yes.
shove it into the prey.
Yeah. Do they have grooves on the teeth?
So yeah, that's been a thought, is that they do have grooves. They do have grooves, some of them at least, but also some shrews that don't seem to be venomous have grooves, and so the presence of grooves has kind of been debated as
Okay.
to whether or not it's indicative of having venom. It's really just the fact that those incisors kind of form a bowl almost that they can shove in to the prey.
Yeah. This is something that has come up with like lizards and
Yes.
such, where you'll see these grooves that are thought to be a simpler version of like the hypodermic needle fangs that snakes have, where you've just got this groove that the venom can move along. But it makes perfect sense that they are just using the macro shape
Mhm.
of the teeth together as a delivery mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so solenodons and it seems like that extinct group, the Nisophantes, do have grooves in their anterior teeth. They're in the incisors and in the canines, and those are being used probably for injecting venom. Definitely in solenodons and probably in Nisophantes. So those guys do have grooves, and they do seem to be associated with the delivery of venom. But it's a little bit more debated in shrews
Yeah.
as to whether or not those grooves in their incisors are serving the same function or not.
Well,
Yeah.
and it makes sense that it's hard to determine because groove is great for allowing the venom to flow, but it also could just be structural.
Right.
It makes me think of the oft cited myth of the blood groove that's down the middle of a sword that is
Yes.
said to keep the sword from getting stuck because it allows the flow, and that's not what that is. That is a fuller. That is a way to reduce weight while maintaining the strength of the blade, so that you have a lighter blade that you can swing faster.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with the blood. But it makes sense both ways. So I could see absolutely that it could be serving either function or both.
So
Yeah.
shrew venom, as I understand it, is paralytic, right? That's it. Its main function is that it paralyzes prey, or am I oversimplifying?
Yeah, it seems to actually, I mean, so in dual parts, it's pretty simple in the fact that it's only made up of a couple of different toxins, but it's also, there's a lot of effects that come from those different toxins. So that is a big component, is it does seem to be at least partially neurotoxic and paralytic. So, when people have taken samples of shrew venom and injected it into things like mice, or if they've just observed the behavior of things that have gotten bitten by these venomous shrews, a lot of them experience paralysis. They have trouble breathing, which is another aspect of the neurotoxic aspects. But their heart rate also becomes really irregular, and their blood pressure drops pretty dramatically. And
Okay.
so there's actually been a lot of discussion as to sort of convergent evolution in venom. And so it seems like a lot of shrew venoms are most similar to things like Gila monster venoms, and then some sort of elapids and viperids as well.
Yeah.
It's a pretty nasty cocktail.
That the classic use of venom, episode 97, to just start shutting stuff down.
Mm-hmm.
Venom is just throwing wrenches into gears, and just the body starts to malfunction. And while that body is not functioning properly, the shrew can do whatever it wants with it.
Yes.
Yeah, and that sort of that paralytic idea, the immobilization component of the venom, is really important for shrews. And so this is probably one of the things that allows these bigger shrews, so things like the northern short-tailed shrew are known to be venomous. It's things like that that allow them to try and take big prey like rabbits or other small mammals, is the fact that they can bite a bigger thing and then let the venom do the work, immobilize it, and then they can do what they will afterwards. And that immobilization thing too also helps them with storing food. So they will, like I mentioned earlier, they'll cache prey. So they'll take prey, they'll bite it, envenomate it, and that immobilizes it, and they can bring it back to their burrow and store it for a while alive. So
Yeah.
Yep. This is what we brought up in our very first episode of Spooky.
Yes.
Our vampires used this is why we went with shrews.
Yep.
Was because of this venom component and this idea of just the horror of them like grabbing a bug, paralyzing it, and say, cool, I need you alive, but I need you in like 3 hours.
Yep.
So I'll
Yep.
be back.
Yeah. There's a little anecdote about the water shrew. There's actually one that was documented taking a bullfinch, so a small bird. So something that's really
Nice.
fast and flighty, they were able to take down with their paralytic venom.
Wow. Is the venom, does it have any effect on humans?
Uh, at the right dosage, it would, but thankfully,
Sure.
the amount that shrews are producing is pretty small. I've heard that on top of just being painful because it's a small mammal bite, shrews can be particularly painful. The pain can last quite a while, but that
Yeah.
seems to be the extent of it in humans, thankfully.
So
Okay.
a swarm of shrews.
Watch out.
Yeah, death by a thousand cuts. Yeah,
Yes, yeah. The death by 1,000 envenomations. Those dog-sized shrews we were talking about.
Yes.
That's gotta watch out for those.
yeah.
So, shrews, fascinating. I have no doubt that, Derek, you could tell us more about living shrews for several more hours. Unfortunately, that's simply just not the format of the podcast. And we do have to get to talking about shrew evolution
Yes.
and the fossil record. But before we do that, the word shrew is used for lots of things, and we have already been tripped up multiple times in this discussion by things that are called shrews that are not shrews. Now, this is not a episode about things that are not shrews. That's specifically the title is shrews.
That's why it is called. That's why this episode is named "Things That Are Shrews."
Things that are shrews are shrews is the episode. But we did the same thing with eels when Shay was on here for the eels episode in episode 198. Could you give us just a brief overview of things that are not shrews?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so probably the most famous one, and the one that I've encountered when I'm talking to people about shrews is elephant shrews.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've had a couple of people come up to me and be like, "I really love shrews. Shrews are great. I love their wiggly little noses, and they're really cute when they yawn." And I have to break their hearts and say those are not the ones that I work on, and in fact, they're not very close related to the stuff that I work on at all. So yeah, elephant shrews, like the name suggests, are actually more closely related to things like elephants and hyraxes and manatees than they are to true shrews. This is a group of small mammals that's native to Africa. Yeah, so not shrews, but very confusing name. Another one is the otter shrews, which also live in Africa. And
Okay.
yeah, the famous thing about otter shrews is the fact that they are one of the few mammals that undulates their body side to side to swim. So
Nice.
the otter in the name, right? They're semi-aquatic, but they undulate their tails as side to side as opposed to up and down like most normal mammals.
I have to look this up now.
Yeah, not shrews. Actually, more closely related to things like elephant shrews than true shrews. And the other one, the big one that a lot of people talk about, are tree shrews.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the scandentians, or tree shrews. They're found in Southeast Asia, and they kind of look like squirrels almost in a lot of aspects. But they're actually more closely related. This is another one that's more closely related to you than it is to a true shrew. These guys seem to be somewhere related to primates and those flying lemurs I mentioned earlier.
I always forget that.
Yeah. And I know there are also shrew rats. I made a list in preparation for this because I was like, I didn't realize how many, because there are shrew rats and shrew opossums and marsupial shrews, which apparently are different from shrew opossums.
Yes, yeah. So shrew rats and shrew mice are this radiation of rodents in primarily Southeast Asia that are living lives pretty similar to a lot of those semi-fossorial shrews I mentioned earlier. So
Yeah.
these are these are rodents, sorry, not shrews, that are eating a lot of worms in the undergrowth of rainforests in Southeast Asia. And you mentioned shrew opossums. These are marsupials native to South America. So
Mm-hmm.
more closely related to something like the Virginia opossum we have around here, or a kangaroo, than it is to an actual shrew. These are kind of the equivalent of shrews in the majority of South America. They were doing it long before shrews were ever there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're a really interesting group. They're actually a lot more diverse in the past as well. There's a lot of really interesting diversity in shrew opossums, but they're not shrews.
Yeah.
And then the marsupial shrews, yeah, this is one particular genus from New Guinea, Physicolosaurus. It's got Sorex in the name, so even really driving that shrew comparison further. But
Yeah.
it's a really obscure little marsupial. There's not a ton known about it, but it's related to these other sort of insect-eating and carnivorous marsupials from Australia. So things like quolls or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tasmanian devils. This marsupial shrew is more closely related to them than it is to a true shrew.
Very cool. So yeah, the word shrew just kind of has been used to mean small mammal.
Yeah.
Yep, it's pretty much just small insect-eating mammal.
Yeah,
Yes.
in much the way that eel means longfish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Basically.
Very cool. It's interesting to note the marsupial shrews because I meant to mention this before, but as you were describing shrews and their lifestyle and their adaptations, I've always kind of thought of shrews as kind of like mice, but not.
Mhm.
But the more you explained about them, the more I started thinking they're really more like opossums.
Yeah.
They have a sort of a similar dentition. There are swimming ones and climbing ones. They tend to be fairly small. Some of them have prehensile tails. They seem to have a lot in common with small marsupial mammals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's most of those radiations of small marsupials you've just mentioned there are all things that are found in South America, and so they were doing the things that shrews are doing on all the other continents while South America was isolated for most of the age of mammals. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of parallels you can draw there for sure.
Cool. Well, I won't because we have a whole other half of our discussion to get to. This has been a fascinating introduction to the biology of living shrews, but this is a paleontology podcast, which means that we have a quota to reach. We are obligated contractually to talk about fossils.
Yes.
So
much to our listeners' chagrin.
they hate it. This is the worst. This is the part where all of our
Yeah,
listeners
it
turn
just
the
drops
podcast
off.
off. The listenership just plummets. We're going to take a short break, and then after that, we're going to make Derek tell us about shrews of the past.
Fantastic.
All right, so let's move away from the present and go as far back as we can. What do we know about the earliest shrews or the evolutionary origins of shrews?
So yeah, in the early part of the Cenozoic, right, the age of mammals, there's this slew of primitive-looking insect-eating mammals bopping around North America and Asia. And so shrews and other Euliplotyphlones seem to be coming from this sort of stock. These are things like nyctotheres or geolabids. These are two groups of small insect-eating mammals that people sometimes ally with shrew or more broadly Euliplotyphlan origins. But shrews, as we know them, shrews pop up in the Middle Eocene, so about 45 million years ago in North America, specifically with this genus called Dumnina, which was actually named by Cope. So yeah, Dumnina is this shrew from the Middle Eocene, and it looks a lot like modern shrews in a lot of aspects. So it lacks the cheekbones, like I mentioned, modern shrews do. It doesn't have a zygomatic arch. It has those really prominent upper and lower incisors, but in some other details, it looks a little bit different. It looks sort of like a nice grade into what we expect shrews to look like. So
Okay.
yeah, it doesn't have that weird pocketing on the inside surface of the coronoid process, the sticky uppy bit. It doesn't have that divided mandibular condyle that most that shrews are known for that I talked about earlier. And it also just has more teeth. It's got more of those little tiny unicuspid teeth I mentioned in the anterior portions of the upper and lower jaw than in modern
Okay.
shrews. So it's kind of a nice intermediate between generalized insect-eating mammal stuff and true shrews.
Okay.
It sounds like the generalized insect-eating mammal has been a thing basically for the whole Cenozoic.
Yeah.
That the last 60 million years, there have been things that we would have called shrews.
Yeah. Well, so for a big chunk of that, it has been shrews, but really early on in the Cenozoic, there was a bunch of different mammal groups that may or may not be closely related to actual shrews that have been doing it too. So it's been kind of a mess to try and figure out. And it's not really well understood quite yet where a lot of these things go. But yeah, there was a kind of a slew of insect-eating animals early on, and then shrews pretty quickly became shrews and started dominating in that small insect-eating mammal niche across the areas they could get to. So North America and Asia and places like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So when we're looking at the fossil record of shrews, I have seen shrew fossils because I have worked on a bunch of Cenozoic sites with people who study small mammals, including Derek, you yourself. My understanding is that I think every shrew fossil I've ever seen has been a lower jaw. What do shrew fossils tend to look like? Are they all lower jaws? Does it get better than that? What is sort of the fossil record of shrews?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. For by and
Great.
large, most shrews are known from either isolated teeth or isolated lower jaws. There are some exceptions, like there's a couple of really good specimens of that early shrew Dimnina that I mentioned that have, a lower jaw and, a cranium, a skull, plus some postcranial bits, so like hands and feet. And so those are
Okay.
really exceptional. We do have a little bit of that sort of stuff from early on, but by and large, most fossil shrews are known from isolated lower jaws and teeth. And that makes sense when you start to think about the sort of taphonomic processes that are acting on shrews, right? The lower jaw is, all things considered, a pretty dense bone, right? It doesn't have too many sinuses or cavities in it. And the teeth, there's iron in there in a lot of them,
Yep.
and teeth just generally are also pretty resistant. So it makes sense that most of our shrew fossils are lower jaws. And that's actually been kind of helpful. And I mean, maybe it's in part because it's all we have, but the fact that we have a bunch of lower jaws means we can use the sort of degree of division of that mandibular condyle that I mentioned earlier to sort of pinpoint which groups of shrews certain fossils belong to. Because it turns out that the degree of division between those two components of that mandibular condyle are pretty diagnostic down to pretty specific levels.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds like from the first half when you were talking about the anatomical uniquities of shrews, a lot of the features you were mentioning were lower jaw features,
Yeah.
which I assume is partly because we asked a shrew paleontologist
Yes.
to explain what is interesting anatomically about shrews, but also that there are a bunch of features on the lower jaw that make them distinct. So lower jaws is not a bad thing to find in the fossil record if that's all you're going to find of shrews.
Yeah, exactly. And we do, I mean, there are some postcranial bits and pieces that people have found and have pretty confidently assigned to different fossil shrews, but then it becomes a fact of, well, there's not too much to compare it to because most of the record is, lower jaws and sometimes upper jaws too. So
Right.
they're of limited utility sometimes, even if we do find postcranial stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the earliest shrews from the Middle Eocene, that there are a handful of pretty good specimens
Mm-hmm.
there. That you've got skulls and you've got some farther back in the body bits. Is that the earliest? Are our earliest shrews pretty well represented?
Actually, yeah, a lot of them are coming from places like the White River. So Dimnina, that particular specimen of Dimnina is from the White River, which is pretty well known for some exceptional preservation. And so a lot of them are pretty well preserved. There's sort of really well preserved ones early on, and then we've got this sort of lull in between, and then we get a lot of the record comes from basically the Miocene, Pliocene, and Pleistocene of Europe. Has a really, really good fossil shrew record, basically continuous from the beginning of the Miocene to the present day. And so once we get to the Miocene, we can say a lot more about shrew evolution, especially in Europe, because we have such a fantastic record from there. And mostly that's because there's a lot of areas of Europe that have a lot of karst. And so that's been this way since the Miocene. And so there's been all of these karst deposits, all of these deposits accumulating in karst that preserve shrews.
So like caves and fissures and sinkholes.
Exactly. Yeah. So lots and lots of good deposits of shrews, which tell us a lot about shrew evolution.
Yeah.
So shrews aren't the fossil record of shrews isn't like the fossil record of, say, snakes or even turtles, where we have some good ones and then there's these like handful of really early, maybe this is it, or we've got like half of a tooth. It sounds like the shrew fossil record is more like bats, where they appear pretty well represented in the Eocene and is clearly a shrew.
Yeah, it's basically a less extreme version of bats. It's
Yeah.
it's a shrew, so it still looks a lot like other small mammals, but the things that define a shrew are pretty well present by the time we see the first shrews.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Cool.
little bit like that.
So shrews proper, Sauricidae, shows up in the Eocene, but then the fossil record of shrews, it sounds like, really gets started around 20 million years ago, early Miocene. So within this time span, are there particularly exciting shrew fossils? Are there like interesting moments or trends throughout shrew evolution? Give us some of the highlights of the shrew fossil record.
I was gonna make a joke of saber-toothed shrews, but
Saber-toothed shrews.
really, They're not that far off.
No, they're not.
No saber-tooth shrews, but yeah, so it's actually a really interesting thing going on with shrew evolution. You mentioned Cericidae. There's this other radiation. It's kind of the like the evil sister to true shrews called the heterocericids.
They all had goatees.
Yeah,
The anti-shrews.
it's the heterocericids, the different shrews that are. These are the shrews that are making up most of that. Between the Eocene and the Miocene record, these heterocericids, and so we've got a lot of examples of those. One of them is from Asia. It's this genus called Lusorex, which is basically a whole shrew like squashed flat. Like we have the whole thing with soft tissue impressions and everything.
That's how you know it wasn't a hero shrew.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
This one got.
Yeah, but yeah. So these heterocericids are an entirely extinct group of shrews, but there's one really big famous one from Europe, and it persists into the Miocene. It's called Dinosaurex.
Yeah,
And I had to include it because it's Dinosaurex. But yeah, it's this big heterocericid shrew from the Miocene of Europe, and it persists for a really long time. It's basically there for most of the Miocene. It originates sometime around the beginning, about 23 million years ago, and it goes extinct about 9 million years ago. And there's this particular species of Dinosaurex called Dinosaurex pachygnathus, so the thick-jawed, terrible shrew, which is pretty cool.
Very nice.
That's one of the cool examples from Europe that we can talk about because we have such a great record.
How big are we talking for dinosaurs?
This is a shrew that would have probably been something about the size of a hamster. So like,
okay, all right, so big for a shrew, yeah.
Big for a shrew, yeah.
Cool. Now, the heterocericids, are those considered to be very closely related to true Cericidae? Or is this like one of those examples of this is a different family that is almost indistinguishable from shrews, but we don't actually know how closely related they are?
No, yeah, they are very closely related to true shrews, to the point where
Okay.
it's kind of debated whether or not they're a distinct family or a subfamily within Cericidae. It seems like the general trend has been to basically call them a separate family that's immediately sister to true shrews, which is kind of why I called them the evil twins of true shrews, because they're forming a sister group. They're just a little bit different.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, it's another, as often comes up in the podcast, example of if you were to time travel back a bit, some of the common shrews you would find would not be the same lineage, the same type of shrew that we have today. And so shrews have been dominating insectivorous mammal roles for a long time, but sometimes it's been a different group of shrews.
Yes.
Yeah, and that gets into one of my favorite groups of shrews. It's a tribe of shrews called the Inurocericine shrews. This is one of those mole shrews, only alive today in Southeast Asia, but they have a really good fossil record from Europe and Asia, and also here in North America too.
Oh.
And these are big shrews, and they're doing a bunch of really weird things with their teeth. So these are shrews that have, I mentioned those unicuspids in their jaws. They've got really big bulbous ones, so it seems like they were doing a lot of crushing. And they also really reduce the size of the back teeth, so their last molars are either really tiny or gone in some different species. So this is a really cool radiation.
Interesting. So less slicing and more crushing.
Yeah, and so it's a good example of like a lot of the shrews that you'll find, in any given particular place today, maybe don't have the most extensive fossil record there, right? So like, there's been a lot of movement across between continents of different shrew lineages.
Man, it's cool getting to see the different ways to be a shrew, and I don't know, it just thinking about all the possibilities. Like the shrews are a much more versatile group than I had fully appreciated before this.
Yeah, there's been a lot of really cool things happening in the fossil record with shrews, and a lot of just sort of swapping between continents. Lots of really interesting biogeographic trends that you can say. So lots of things have not remained stable in shrew evolution.
Yeah.
A really good example of sort of what you're just talking about, of how shrews have been doing a lot of different things in the fossil record, is there's this shrew from Ellesmere Island, Canada. So really far north in the Arctic Circle, called Arctosaurus polaris, which, yeah, that's a pretty redundant name. It really tells you where it's from.
Really gives it away.
This is a shrew from about 3.5 million years ago. It's from a site called the Beaver Pond site, all the way up there in Ellesmere Island. And it wouldn't have been quite as cold as it is today back then. It still would have been cold. It's about, average temps would have been somewhere in the range of like places like Scandinavia today. But there's this shrew Arctosaurus from up there that looks way different from any modern or fossil shrew. So I mentioned those Inurosaurine shrews, those mole shrews, have really reduced their last molars quite a lot. Arctosaurus expands their last molar really substantially, and it's got all these folds on it too. It's got really low crown cusps, and so the suggestion has been that this is actually a shrew that was eating maybe fruit, like a frugivorous shrew, or seeds maybe primarily, which would be totally unique for any modern or fossil shrew.
Oh,
Well, I'd
that's
have to
awesome.
imagine that you have to do something different if you're going to be a shrew that lives in the Arctic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can't imagine that modern shrews, that you mentioned that they don't make it into the polar regions, which makes sense because I assume that a shrew would just freeze instantly in an environment like that.
Yeah, they make it pretty far up there, but I mean, even as warm as it was back 3.5 million years ago, this would have still been a really challenging environment to live in for a shrew. And even one that was frugivorous, we don't have no idea how its sort of physiology would have worked, how it would have made it through the winters up there, because it was still freezing and there was potentially permafrost forming at various points up there.
Yeah, it was collecting fruit to lure in other small animals and then taking them.
Yeah, for other overwintering mammals.
Yes.
And then grabbing a deer by the jugular.
Just specializes in seeking out hibernating animals.
Yes, yep.
And eating them.
Man, and like, was their behavior very shrew-like, living that far and eating different stuff? Did they have the same high octane behavior, or were they living differently to survive up there and live that way? That's so interesting.
Yeah, as far as I know, there's only one specimen known of Arctosaurus, and it's a partial lower jaw. So we really have tantalizingly little to talk about with it. But it seems like it was doing something very weird.
My hypothesis is that it was adapted for eating plant material because it spent the coldest parts of the year inside the stomachs of hibernating bears.
Yes.
Eating whatever they had stored up.
Yeah, yep.
And then when it got warm, they would eat their way out of the bear and go out and do their shrew thing. Prove me wrong, paleontologists. Very cool.
Oh,
yeah. And so talking a little bit more about the sort of trends we see in shrew evolution, and because we have such a great record in Europe, we can say a lot specifically for that continent. And one of the really interesting things that's emerged is the fact that it seems like sort of the small Eulipotyphlins in Europe basically took turns being duraphagous, so eating hard stuff, probably snails primarily. So we've got a couple of different lineages of shrews, and then also some other Eulipotyphlins that have a lot of crazy adaptations of their teeth for cracking into snails. So this starts all the way back in the late Oligocene with this group called the Dimylids, which we don't really have any idea what they're related to within Eulipotyphlins, but they have these big cracking teeth that they were probably using to crush into snails with. And then they go extinct by the late Miocene, and the Inurosaurine shrews that I mentioned earlier, those mole shrews pop up, and they start doing a similar thing until they go extinct in Europe in the late Pliocene. And then all the way up until the middle Pleistocene, so less than 1 million years ago, we have this other radiation of shrews in Europe that's also seeming to be cracking into snails too. So these big weird shrews with big weird teeth, big bulbous teeth for crushing into snails. It seems to have been kind of a trend throughout the majority of Europe's history as a continent in the Cenozoic.
Man, it really is a testament to how incredibly successful snails are that so many groups have developed this way to make snails a major part of their diet. Also, the image, just because shrews are very like fast and aggressive when they eat something, because they they're not leisurely when they eat food. They're picturing a shrew going through a snail with that fervor. Really gross.
Just shavings of shell going off in all directions.
Just yeah.
That's fascinating to think that snail, like crushing shrews,
Mhm.
Durophagus, episode 197, hard food adapted shrews, have just been a part of shrew diversity for the last, 20 million years or so.
Makes
Hmm.
tons of sense because there's tons of little armored inverts for them to be eating, but not what I typically think of for the
Yeah.
group.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we have this fantastic record in Europe, which is probably part of the reason we've detected this in the first place, right? There probably were, and I suspect there are fossil shrews from North America that were probably doing similar things, crushing into snails. It's just we don't have quite the complete record that Europe does for
Yeah.
our shrews here in North America. So it's hard to
Yeah.
show this basically progression of through time of Durophagus Eulipotyphlones or shrews.
So, speaking of the shrew fossil record of North America, one more stop on our tour of the fossil record of shrews will take us to the gray fossil site, our favorite fossil site to mention, where there are not only shrews, which I've known multiple people who have studied the shrews at the gray fossil site. This has been a part of that known fauna for a long time, but the focus of your research. So, if you would please, sort of to cap off our discussion of the shrew fossil record, tell us a little bit about the shrews of the Gray Fossil Site and your research.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, so the gray fossil site is basically the highlight of the shrew fossil record of North America. Outside of those early ones that I mentioned from the White River, the gray fossil site is one of the more diverse shrew assemblages that we have preserved in North America. And it's, as you guys have mentioned about the gray fossil site before, it's from a really unique time too. So there's a lot of really interesting things going on for the gray fossil site shrews.
Yeah. For any listeners that this is your first episode that you're listening to, the Great Fossil Site fossils are about 5 million years old. It's full of tapirs and rhinos and red pandas and alligators and stuff. But the tiny components of the fauna have been really well studied because we
Yes.
do a lot of screening and we have researchers like Dr. Josh Samuels, who we've mentioned a bunch of times, who really both his own research and helps and encourages a lot of students doing research on especially small mammals at the Gray Fossil Site.
Yeah, and so through previous research and my own research at the Gray Falls site, we've shown that there's really a lot of different species present. There's probably something like 8 different species of shrews at the Gray Falls site compared
Nice.
to today, right, where there's maybe 3 species of shrews native to the region around the Gray Fossil site. So
Interesting.
lots and lots of shrews, and that tells us a lot of really interesting things about the environment locally. So the fact that we have so many shrews tells us a healthy population of invertebrates for sure. And
Yeah.
people have used basically the number of shrews and the different types of shrews as a proxy for the sort of environmental humidity at
Hmm.
various
Hmm.
locations, both in Europe and in other places. And so the fact that we've got a lot of shrews is another sort of bit of evidence that the Gray Fossil Site was a warm and humid environment. And getting sort of to the crux of what I did at ETSU for my master's degree is I was really curious about the diets of the shrews that we have at the Great Fossil Site. Because a lot of people have put forward a lot of different hypotheses about what shrews might have been eating in the fossil
Hmm.
record, and I really wanted to try and test that sort of stuff. Right, with instead of just throwing out hypotheses, I wanted to test these hypotheses by throwing some stats at it. And so what I ended up doing is measuring a bunch of modern shrews and documenting the sort of dietary preferences that they have, and then trying to take measurements from fossil shrews and see if I couldn't infer anything about what they were eating.
Yeah.
So yeah, the gray fossil is a really good little test subject for that because we've got a bunch of really interesting shrews. So we've got one of those big mole shrews, those Aneurocericine shrews, um, that would have been about the size of a hamster, and then all the way down to really really tiny things that would have been probably approaching the smallest shrews around today. So we've got a really wide spectrum of sizes in the shrews at the Grave Fossil Site, and they're from a couple of different lineages as well. So there's some shrews that are from totally extinct groups, and there's other shrews that, like I mentioned, those mole shrews are still around today, but also some of the other shrews have modern relatives around in the Appalachians today.
Cool. Did you find anything unusual or particularly unexpected or interesting with the diets of the Gray Fossil Site shrews?
Yeah, so it seems like that big shrew that I mentioned, that big mole shrew that we have, people have suggested that those guys might have been eating a lot of vertebrate prey just because they're big and they have some aspects of their teeth that seem to be maybe more slicing adapted.
Hmm.
And what I found over the course of my research is that it seems like it was probably more likely to have been crushing into snails. It would have been one of those crushing shrews that I mentioned.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
we've got this record in Europe of a bunch of crushing adapted shrews, and it seems like we have one of those here at the Gray Fossil Site now too.
Neat. We also have a bunch of snails
Yeah.
found at the grave. So we have hard-shelled things in the fossil record of gray. And we also have like clams and stuff. So there were hard-shelled things that we know of to eat, and then there would have been tons of bugs that we don't know of because they haven't fossilized very well.
Yes.
Well, that's I mean, that's an interesting thing you mentioned there too, is because the fact that we have so many shrews probably means we did have a very robust population of invertebrates around. It's just they don't preserve.
That was my
Yeah.
first thought.
So that's another thing that people have used, the density of shrews as a proxy for is just basically how many bugs do you have around? Because they're predators, right? They have to be
Yes.
sustaining a population of it. So
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is there a way that we could find a correlation between shrew diversity and insect or invertebrate diversity? And could we extrapolate from that to go, yeah, the gray fossil site probably had this many lineages of worms and this diversity of insects.
Hmm.
I don't know how
Hmm.
granular you could get with it, but that's a really intriguing thought.
yeah, I mean, outside of really big obvious adaptations like eating snails, the Duraphagus shrews, the granularity seems to drop off pretty precipitously. So
Yeah.
it doesn't
Makes
seem like
sense.
you're able to say this particular type of shrew is eating, these certain families of invertebrates with that much fidelity that far back. But you can say, broadly, we've got a snail eating shrew, so there are probably a lot of snails. We have a shrew that seems to have been doing a lot of slicing with its teeth, so maybe it was eating more worms, so more soft
Mm,
things, stuff like that. You can't necessarily say anything about like, oh, the fact that we've got, one shrew here that eats this particular insect. You can't say anything like
right,
that.
right.
Yeah, yeah. But like there would have been lots of creepy crawlies in the leaf litter
Yeah.
where these shrews were probably living.
Well, there were
Yep.
also a lot of small vertebrates.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you mentioned that some shrews will go after vertebrate prey, and there's tons of small fish at the fossil site, and there's tons of rodents and stuff. So I feel like you'd have a hard time starving as a shrew
Oh,
at the Gray Fossil Site.
I
Yeah.
really hope. Like I know this is probably something we can't tell with the material we have. I really hope one of our shrews was a swimming shrew.
As far as I can tell, no, they're not. We don't have any shrews that are from that sort of lineage of swimming shrews.
Okay.
There's
Yeah,
one main lineage, and then there's a couple that have done it outside of that, and we don't have any from that main lineage. So, as far as I
now
know, we don't have any swimming shrews. But
we do have swimming moles
Oh
yes, we
yeah.
do have
at the Gray
those.
Fossil Site
Okay. Yes. All
that
right. I'll take it as
Danielle and Josh identified. Yes, so we did have
yes.
semi-aquatic moles at the Gray Fossil Site.
I will take
Yes.
this as compensation.
Yeah.
Derek, do you have a favorite shrew fossil, like a personal specimen that is personally meaningful to you?
Oh, yeah. The one big shrew that we have from the fossil site, that big mole shrew, there's a couple of really, really nice lower jaws that we've got preserved. One of them is probably going to be the holotype when that shrew gets described, but that particular shrew is probably my favorite. I think it's really impressive. Even though it would have only been about the size of a hamster, and the actual jaw itself is, a couple centimeters long, if that. It's
Yeah.
it's still really really fantastic to see. It's on display at the museum as well, and so we've got uh,
Yeah.
the jaw itself, and then a blown up 3D print of that jaw as well on display. It's really cool. That's my
Yeah.
favorite.
Do we? I think I maybe knew this at one point. Do we have fossil shrew teeth at Gray that have the reddish orange coloration from the iron deposits?
It can be hard to tell, and it definitely is for our shrews because of the color of the fossils
Oh,
themselves. They're
Yeah.
really dark brown, and so that's actually been something that's hampered the ability of us to sort of detect the history of pigmentation in shrew teeth. Is depending on the fossil site, it's really either hard to detect or very easy if you just look at them. If they're pale fossils and there's a bunch of iron staining on the teeth, you know that shrew had pigmented enamel. But for ours, there's been some suspicion, and the ones that I've looked at from our material look like they have some particular colors going on in the areas you'd expect to see that iron staining. But
Mhm.
I haven't looked at it in detail, and you'd really want to do some sort of chemical analyses to make sure.
That's what I was just wondering,
Yeah.
is that we probably could grind it up and test the enamel, but
Hold a magnet over it.
yes, right?
Yeah.
The first time I encountered fossil shrews, I believe, was at the site out in South Dakota that I worked on, which was very late Ice Age, and those you could see the pigmentation
Yes, yeah.
in the teeth because they were that was basically identical to modern bone. So
Yeah, yeah. No, you can see it in a lot of those late Pleistocene, early Holocene things, and but the further back you go, the harder it becomes to detect that sort of stuff.
yeah. Well, very cool stuff. Derek, thank you so much for coming here to wow us about shrews. I think Will and I have both been humbled
Hmm.
by our underestimation of how interesting and specialized shrews are.
The thought I had in that line exactly is, every now and then, I'll just be bored and be thinking about, like, if I were to do, a seed world where I just filled it with all the animals and wanted to see what they became as they filled in all of the environments and niches. Rodents are usually one of my go-tos.
Mm-hmm.
Shrews are now on that list of, I want to see big predatory
The
shrews.
shrew capybara.
Yeah, and like shrew otters that have become fully big aquatic predators.
I don't want to see
Yeah.
that. Just paralyzing dolphins and sticking them in
Yes.
underwater caves.
We've never gotten a megafaunal Eulipotyphloid before, so that would be the opportunity.
Right?
Yeah, it's fascinating to think that this is a group that seems to have maxed out at hamster size.
Yes.
Yep, pretty much. Yeah, large rat is about as big as they've gotten.
That is
I
a
mean, they've got their thing and they're sticking to
Yeah.
it.
Well, and it makes you wonder if they're camping out there because now they're going to start competing with other animals that are going to make it tougher for them, so they are able to be specialized at this size scale. Or is there something about, like, you've done a weird thing to mammal metabolism being the way you are, and we don't know how to turn that off evolutionarily?
right.
So if you get bigger than this, you're just going to die.
Yeah.
So until one of you gets the mutation you need or something, like, which category is it that's keeping them in the size as
Yeah.
much, is an interesting question.
There's been some suggestion that it's probably it might be the former, that
Yeah.
you're starting to compete with things like small mustelids, so weasels and things, if you
Yes.
get much bigger than large, small rat sized. So it seems to maybe just be competition from other mammal groups, but shrews don't seem to have gotten the opportunity to try things out yet. So
And as intimidating as we've just been going over as shrews can be, I don't want to go up against mustelids either.
No.
Weasels and the like. So I don't blame you, shrews. Staying in your lane is sometimes a noble thing to do.
Well, and that's the problem, because shrews are in this place where if they get any bigger on land, they have to deal with mustelids.
Mm-hmm.
And if they get any bigger in water, they have to deal with mustelids.
Yes.
And if they get any bigger in the trees, they have to deal with primates.
Yep.
None of which are animals that you want to mess with.
Yep.
They have put themselves in a hard place.
Interesting.
Well, this has been fascinating. Listeners, we hope that you have learned about shrews and have enjoyed this journey as much as we have. Before we wrap up the episode, there is one last thing to do, and that is our patron question. One of the benefits that our listeners can get by supporting us on Patreon is the ability to submit questions for us to answer here on the podcast. Since we have a guest, Derek, we invite you to answer this question with us. This episode's question comes from Megan, who asks, what are some of the ways that humans are influencing evolution in animals? For example, cliff swallows evolving shorter wings to avoid being hit by cars, or animals with antlers and horns evolving smaller antlers and horns as a result of trophy hunting, etc. Derek, I know that you think a lot about sort of ecosystems and human interaction and stuff like that, so I'm sure you have at least one example of something like this.
yeah, I was gonna, I went looking for a shrew related example, and it turns out there is a bit of research about this in shrews. One of
Oh,
one of the
great.
studies I was able to find talked about how some shrews in urban environments in Europe actually have a lower metabolic rate than shrews
Oh.
from rural areas because cities are warmer, so they don't need to be cranking their metabolism quite as high.
I was wondering about that with shrews, like if they were in a, if you were able to put them in a perfectly air conditioned room, and they live and breed there, would we see a shift? So that, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, there you go.
Interesting. On the note of small mammals, obviously rats are a great example. Not so much because we've directly modified them, but we have created habitats that are perfect for rats to find food and breed and avoid predators. So they have become sort of city specialists. There's a bunch of animals that have adapted strategies for surviving in urban environments. There are, falcons that will hunt in cities. Obviously, pigeons are great at nesting in cities. There are also like big cats in Asia and Africa that will like prowl around the edges of cities and go hunting in the easier spots there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another example that I recall off the top of my head. In the Bahamas, there was some populations of anole lizards, anoles, the little lizards. The ones in cities actually have longer legs and bigger pads on their feet, the bigger sticky pads, so they can climb around on the smoother structures in cities better.
Yes. Yes.
Very cool. And then I think the obvious answer is there are tons of animals where we are seeing changes to their life cycle or their sizes as a result of changing temperatures.
Yes.
That climate change, the warming temperatures and changing climate patterns has been producing measurable impacts and changes in animal populations around the world. Both including where they're able to move to. Like our state of Tennessee gets more armadillos now than it used to.
Yep.
But also in like body size. There's been a lot of this research in plants as well, that plants are showing changes in their daily or yearly schedule and also in where they grow and in their size and stuff like that. So, yes, we have had a significant impact on the world around us, and some animals are evolving to work around it so far.
Another just fun, quick example is I know that some city raccoons have learned to look both ways before crossing streets. That they've noted that they've learned to adjust for traffic and wait for a clearing in passing cars.
Fascinating, a little bit disturbing.
Yes.
Megan, thank you for that question. Thank you to all of our patrons who support us here at the podcast. If you want to learn more about shrews and such, check out the blog post on our website that will be associated with this episode. We'll have pictures of shrews. We'll have links for more information. We'll also have some of these words that we've been using. I'll make sure to put the word Eulipatyphola in there at least one time so people can see what that word looks like.
Yes.
Big thanks to everybody who requested this episode. Thanks to all of our listeners, all of our patrons and supporters, and extra big thanks to our top tier patrons, Sarah May, Jeff Ellington, Danielle, who loves bugs, and Bugs All the Way Down. There's two, there's more bugs people. This episode is coming out in July, probably, so it is Snake Month. It is almost the end of Snake Month, so if you haven't already, join in the Discord Snake Stuff chat, and also consider supporting us at the Snakes and Crocs tier on Patreon. Soon we will be able to announce our donations for the end of the summer that we will be able to make towards reptile conservation thanks to the generous contributions of our patrons. Also, DragonCon's coming up.
Woo!
We're going to be back at DragonCon end of August, early beginning of September. That's going to be a lot of fun. We release episodes every fortnight. So join us here again in a fortnight. Or, hey, if you're listening to this in the distant future, you could probably just go to the next episode right now. Lucky you. And one more enormous thanks to Derek. Derek, thank you so much for being here. This was super fun. You have taught us so much to appreciate about shrews.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm always happy to talk about shrews. I think they're super cool.
They're super interesting.
So episode 444.
Yes.
Shrews Part 2.
The not shrews.
Not shrews, there we go.
Yeah,
The not shrews. We'll talk about all the other ones.
There you go. There's a future episode for all of you to remember and us to forget.
That's not going to be it. I can tell you right now. That is not a promise. That is absolutely not going to be what episode 444 is. We'll find something better.
You might also mentioning that if you're in the future, you can just listen to the next episode now. I bet if Shrews watched TV shows, they'd only binge. They would not be able to wait
well,
week
I mean,
to week.
you have to. Who knows if you're going to be around?
Yeah, they
next
would
week.
not be able to. They would be only binge shows. They'd be like, "Is it finished? No. Tell me a beginning to watch it when it's finished. I'm not watching it until it's finished."
You can't wait another year for the next season. You'll be dead.
Yeah, absolutely. I only watch shows that have concluded, and I can watch them while I eat.
So, to all the Shrews out there, we've got a lot of content. You can binge this content.
Big old backlog for you.
Derek knows. Derek is actually listens to our podcast.
I do, yes, actively.
Yeah, Derek's a fan. This is how. Well, I've said this before. This is how you get on the podcast: is you say nice things about us and you support us, and then we're like, "Well, that's great. Come on."
You know what? I think you need to be in front of a microphone.
I think you need to be saying nice things about us in front of a microphone. That is strictly untrue. All of that, actually. Derek is a very rare example of a person who was reached out to us as a fan of the podcast, and then we got to know Derek, and it was like, oh, this guy could do a Shrews episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Way
this guy
better
really
than
likes
either of
Shrews
us
for
could.
some reason. Let's maybe have on a podcast.
This guy is exactly the kind of weirdo that we need to bring into this podcast
Yep.
to complement our weirdness. Fantastic. Shrew puns and sign-off phrase.
Yeah, we never worked shrewd in, but
No,
that's you all tell us where we should have said it.
where we should have...
Should have said it.
No.
In the recording.
Cut that part out. End the recording. Play the music.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.